They told her marriage was survival. They lied. At 19, Elira Vance stood at the altar wearing chains disguised as lace, traded like livestock to settle her father's debts. Duke Corvin Hale, twice her age, cold as winter steel, master of a fortress where women entered and joy died. Everyone knew what happened to his kind of bride. Everyone pitied her. But here's what they didn't know. The most dangerous man in the frontier territories was about to hand her a key. And the girl they thought was broken, she was about to rewrite every rule they lived by. Stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The chapel smelled like rot and expensive flowers trying to hide it. Elira's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gripped them together, knuckles white beneath the thin lace gloves someone had shoved onto her fingers that morning. The gloves were too small. Everything about this day was too small. The borrowed dress that didn't fit right, the vows she hadn't chosen, the future that had been sold out from under her feet like furniture at an estate sale. "Stop fidgeting," her Aunt Marta hissed from beside her, fingers digging into Elira's elbow hard enough to bruise. "You're making a spectacle." Elira almost laughed. Almost. Because what else could you call this whole nightmare if not a spectacle? The fog outside pressed against the chapel windows like it wanted in, turning the morning gray and sick. Inside wasn't much better. 40-some people filled the pews, merchants her father had owed, their wives dressed in dark silks that rustled with judgment, a handful of frontier lords who'd made the journey just to watch Garrett Vance's daughter pay for his mistakes. Nobody looked happy to be here, least of all her. "He's late," someone muttered from the third row. "Maybe he changed his mind." "Wouldn't blame him. Look at her." Elira's jaw tightened. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the altar where a bored-looking minister shuffled through his notes like this was just another Tuesday. Maybe for him it was. How many desperate transactions had he blessed in this chapel? How many girls had stood exactly where she stood now, trading themselves for survival? Her aunt's grip shifted. "Don't you dare cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. I'm not crying." Her voice came out flat, dead. Good. Let them think she was already broken. Easier that way. The truth was simpler and worse. She had no tears left. 3 months. That's all it had taken for her entire world to collapse. 3 months since the fever took her father in the night, leaving nothing behind but debts that spread through their household accounts like poison. The merchant companies came first, polite, patient, willing to negotiate. Then the moneylenders. Then the kind of men who didn't bother with politeness. Marta had tried. Elira would give her that much. Her father's sister had spent weeks running between creditors, selling off everything that wasn't nailed down. The house went first. Then the horses. Then her mother's jewelry, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but Elira herself. "You're young," Marta had said, voice tired and sharp at the same time. "Pretty enough. Someone will take you." Take. Like she was a stray dog, a burden to pass along. The offers came in fast after that. A grain merchant from the southern townships, 52 years old, 3 dead wives, looking for number 4. A rancher up north who needed help with his land and didn't much care that she couldn't tell wheat from barley. A shipping magnate who'd shown up drunk to their meeting and told Marta he'd break her in gentle. Elira had vomited in the garden after that one. Then Duke Corvin Hale's letter arrived. She remembered Marta's hand shaking as she read it, remembered the way her aunt had looked at her, not with pity, but something worse. Relief. "He'll pay everything," Marta had whispered. "Every debt, every note. He'll clear your father's name." "Why?" Elira had asked. "Why would he do that?" Marta hadn't answered. She didn't have to. Everyone knew about Corvin Hale. The Iron Duke, they called him. Lord of the Grey Moors and the hard frontier territories where winter lasted 9 months and mercy died young. 40 years old, never married, built like he'd been carved from the same stone as his fortress. The stories about him ran dark. They said he'd killed a man with his bare hands over a property dispute, that he'd left his own brother to freeze on the moors during a border war, that women who entered his estate came out different, quiet, hollow, like something inside them had been scraped clean. "I won't do it," Elira had said. Marta's face had gone hard. "Then you'll do it in a debtor's prison. Or worse. Those men don't forget, Elira. They don't forgive. At least this way you'll have a roof. Protection. From what? From him? From everyone else. And that had been that. Because what choice did she have? Starve? Run? Where would she even go? She had no money, no skills worth selling. No family besides Marta, who was already stretched thin trying to keep herself afloat. So here she stood, waiting. The minutes dragged. Behind her, the whispers grew louder. 20 minutes late now. Typical, arrogant bastard. Maybe he's not coming at all. Maybe this was just some kind of... The chapel door slammed open. Every head turned. Elira's heart kicked against her ribs. He didn't walk in. He arrived, like weather. Tall enough to make the doorway look small, shoulders broad under a black coat that had probably cost more than her father's entire estate. His hair was dark, shot through with gray at the temples, pulled back and tied with zero concern for fashion. His face was all hard lines, sharp jaw, blade of a nose, eyes the color of smoke over iron. He looked exactly like what he was, dangerous. Two men followed behind him. One was older, lean and weathered with the look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. The other was younger, barely older than Elira herself, with nervous hands that kept adjusting his jacket. Both wore the hail colors, dark gray trimmed with silver. But Corvin dominated the space. He swept the room with a single glance that seemed to catalog everyone present and find them wanting, then his eyes landed on Elira. She forgot how to breathe. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the room full of people watching him like he was a wolf that had wandered into a henhouse. He just looked at her, one long, steady sweep from the top of her pinned-up hair to the hem of her too-short dress, and then he moved. His boots hit the floor in steady, measured strikes. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. He walked down that aisle like he owned it, like he owned the whole damn world, and maybe in this corner of it, he did. The two men who'd entered with him peeled off to the side, taking positions near the back wall. Guards, maybe. Witnesses. She didn't know. Corvin stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was worse. Bigger. Older than she'd expected, but not soft with it. Hard-earned age, the kind that came from surviving things that killed weaker men. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, old and pale. Another traced along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. His hands hung loose at his sides, and she could see the calluses on them. The rough evidence of a man who worked with more than just his name. Miss Vance? His voice matched the rest of him. Low, rough, with gravel in it. Duke Hale. She was proud her voice didn't shake. Small victories, something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Might have been. Hard to tell. The minister cleared his throat nervously. Shall we, proceed? Your Grace, if you'll take your position. A moment. Corvin held up one hand, not looking away from Elira. Miss Vance and I need to speak, privately. The chapel erupted in whispers. Marta's grip on Elira's elbow tightened to the point of pain. Your Grace, surely that's not... It wasn't a request. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. The iron in those 4 words could have built bridges. The minister stammered something about protocol, propriety, the sanctity of the ceremony. Corvin ignored him completely. Outside, he said to Elira. Now. Then he turned and walked back down the aisle, clearly expecting her to follow. Elira stood frozen. Every eye in the chapel burned into her back. Marta's fingers dug deeper. Don't, her aunt whispered urgently. Don't make him angry. Don't ruin this. Something hot and bitter rose in Elira's chest. Ruin this? This was already ruined. This whole day, this whole situation, it was a disaster wearing a wedding dress. She pulled free of Marta's grip and followed him. The fog swallowed her the moment she stepped outside. It was thicker than before, pressing close and damp against her skin. She could barely see 5 feet ahead. Corvin stood near the chapel steps, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at nothing. You wanted to talk? Elira's voice came out sharper than she intended. Fear did that. Made her mean. He turned. In the gray light, his features looked carved from stone. Do you want to do this? What? This. The marriage. Any of it. He gestured vaguely back toward the chapel. Do you want it? The question hit her like a slap. Does it matter what I want? Yes. Why? Because I'm asking. She stared at him, searching for the trap. There had to be a trap. Men like him didn't ask questions like that without an angle. My aunt says you paid my father's debts, she said slowly. All of them. I did, so I don't have a choice. If I say no, those debts come back. The creditors, the moneylenders, all of it. And I'm... Her throat closed up. She forced the words out anyway. I'm right back where I started. Worse, probably. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer that matters. Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated that. Hated the weakness in it, the fear bleeding through. Corvin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. The debts are paid, he said, regardless of what happens in that chapel. I signed the notes this morning before I came. Your father's name is clear. You're not responsible for anything he left behind. Elira's world tilted. What? You heard me. But then why, if you already paid, she couldn't make her brain work. Why are we here? Why the marriage at all? His jaw tightened. Because there are 5 men in 3 different territories who made offers for you. Men who see debt as leverage and young women as property. I paid the debts to cut off their legal claim. The marriage puts you under my name, my house, my protection. It makes you untouchable. Protected, she repeated slowly. Like property. Like a person I don't want to see destroyed. The sincerity in his voice threw her off balance. She'd been prepared for cruelty, for ownership, for the cold transaction everyone had told her to expect. She hadn't been prepared for this. So if I say no, she said carefully, if I walk away right now, you'll just let me. Yes. And the debts stay paid. Yes. And those men you mentioned? His expression darkened. Will be informed that attempting to contact you would be unwise. There was a threat in that word. A promise of violence barely leashed. Elira's mind raced. Freedom. He was offering her actual freedom. She could walk away from this chapel, from him, from all of it. She could what? Go where? Do what? She had no money, no home, no prospects. Marta couldn't support her. The debts might be paid, but that didn't magic up a life for her to live. And those men, the ones Corvin had warned away. How long would his threats hold them back if she wasn't under his protection? A month? A week? Why? The word came out small, broken. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Something shifted in his face. For just a second, she saw past the iron exterior to something rawer underneath. No, he agreed. I don't. But I know them, and I know what they would have done to you. He paused. Consider this damage prevention. That's it? Damage prevention? That's enough. The fog swirled between them, cold and indifferent. Elira looked back at the chapel. Through the blurred windows, she could see the shapes of people waiting, watching, whispering. 40 witnesses to her humiliation. 40 people who'd come to see Garrett Vance's daughter sold off to settle his mistakes. She thought about her father, about the fever that took him, the debts he'd hidden, the mess he'd left behind. She thought about her mother, dead 10 years now, and wondered what she would say about all this. Probably something practical. Her mother had been good at practical. If I say yes, Elira said slowly, what happens? What do you expect from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Corvin's voice was steady, patient. I'm not interested in a real marriage, Miss Vance. I'm interested in keeping you safe from men who would use you and break you and throw away what's left. That requires a legal bond. Nothing more. People will talk. Let them. They'll say I'm not fulfilling my duties as a wife. I genuinely don't care what they say. She studied his face, looking for the lie, for the crack in the armor that would reveal what he really wanted. But all she saw was tired honesty. One condition, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose fractionally. Name it. If I do this, if I marry you, I want to be able to leave. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. If it doesn't work, if I can't stand it, if you turn out to be worse than you're pretending, I want out. A real out. Not a divorce that drags through courts for years. A clean break. Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Agreed, he said. Though I'll need time to arrange it properly. 6 months minimum. Less than that, and people will ask questions, start digging into why. But after that? He nodded. You'll have your exit clean and clear. My word on it. Your word. She almost laughed. I don't know what that's worth. Neither do I, he admitted. You'll have to decide for yourself. Fair enough. Elira took a breath, let it out slowly. This was insane, all of it. Marrying a stranger, trusting a man whose reputation could curdle milk, walking into a life she knew nothing about based on a conversation in the fog. But what was the alternative? Okay, she said, let's do this. Corvin's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed fractionally. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. That's honest, at least. They walked back into the chapel together. The whispers started immediately, but Corvin ignored them with the ease of a man who'd spent a lifetime not caring what people thought. He took his position at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, face expressionless. Elira stood beside him, her borrowed dress feeling even more ridiculous now. The minister looked between them nervously. Shall we begin? Again? Yes, Corvin said, and quickly, we have a long ride ahead. The ceremony blurred after that. Elira heard the words, obey, honor, cherish, all the usual lies, but they didn't stick. She was too focused on the strange unreality of it all, the feeling that she was watching this happen to someone else. The ring, the minister prompted. Corvin reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a band of white gold, simple and clean, with a single dark stone set in it. Moonstone, she realized. Pale gray with hints of blue, like fog over water. He took her hand. His fingers were warm, rough, surprisingly gentle. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. Like this had been planned, measured, like she'd been measured and found acceptable for purchase. Except that wasn't it, was it? He'd already said the debts were paid. This wasn't a purchase. She didn't know what it was. I do, he said, voice steady and clear. The minister turned to her, waited. 40 people held their breath. Elira looked at the man who just offered her the strangest bargain she'd ever heard, looked at his hard face and his careful hands and his eyes that gave away almost nothing. I do, she said. It sounded like a confession, or maybe a dare. Then, by the authority granted to me by the Territorial Council and the— We're done here, Corvin cut him off, already turning away. Send the certificate to my estate, immediately. He didn't wait for a response, just headed for the door. Elira stood there, frozen, until she felt Marta behind her. Well, her aunt said quietly, it's done. You're his now. Not quite, Elira thought, but close enough. She followed him out into the fog for the second time. The carriage was exactly what she'd expected. Black, unmarked, built like a fortress on wheels. 4 horses stood hitched to it, massive beasts that looked like they could pull a mountain if asked. The younger man from the chapel was already mounted on a separate horse, clearly planning to ride alongside. Corvin opened the carriage door himself, which surprised her. She'd expected a driver to do it, expected him to ignore her completely and climb in first. In, he said. Not an order. Not quite. Just instruction. She climbed in, gathering her skirts awkwardly. The interior was plain. Dark leather seats, no decorations, built for function, not comfort. A small window on each side, both currently showing nothing but gray fog. Corvin settled across from her, taking up far too much space with his broad shoulders and long legs. He rapped twice on the ceiling. The carriage lurched into motion. Silence filled the space between them like a living thing. Elira stared out the window, watching the town disappear into gray nothing. They were headed north, toward the moors, toward his estate that everyone whispered about like it was a tomb with a door that only opened one way. Her throat felt tight. Her hands wouldn't unclench from where they gripped her skirts. You can speak, Corvin said. She looked at him. He was watching her with that same steady, unreadable expression. What do you want me to say? Whatever you're thinking. A bitter laugh caught in her throat. You don't want to know what I'm thinking. Try me. Fine, he asked. I'm thinking about how much you paid for me. The words came out harder than she meant them to, sharp enough to cut. 60,000 marks, you said. That's what it cost to buy Garrett Vance's daughter. I'm thinking about what that number means. Whether I'm worth it. Whether you think I'm worth it. And I'm wondering... Her voice cracked. She swallowed, forced it steady. I'm wondering what you're going to want in return. The silence that followed was different, heavier. Corvin leaned back, his expression giving away nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was matter-of-fact. I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom from men who would have. There's a difference. Semantics. Intent. He shifted, pulling off his coat and folding it beside him. Underneath he wore a plain shirt, dark gray, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms roped with muscle and more scars. As for what I want in return, I already told you. Nothing you're not willing to give. That's vague. It's honest. It's terrifying. That got a reaction, a slight tightening around his eyes that might have been surprise or might have been respect. Fair, he admitted. But here's what I can tell you specifically. You'll have your own rooms at the estate, your own space, your own key. I won't enter without permission. I won't make demands on your time or your company. He said that last word carefully, like he was picking through a minefield. You'll have access to the library, the grounds, anywhere you want to go. Meals can be taken privately or in the dining hall, your choice. If you need anything, clothes, books, supplies, anything, tell Mrs. Haver. She runs the house staff. Elira processed that slowly. You're giving me freedom inside the estate. Yes, but I'm still trapped there. For now. His voice was steady. 6 months, remember? After that, if you want out, I'll arrange it. New name, new location, enough money to start fresh. That was the deal. Why would you do that? If I leave, people will talk. They'll say, I don't care what they say. There was steel in those words, absolute certainty. Let me be very clear about something, Elira. I have spent 20 years building a reputation that keeps threats away from my borders and idiots away from my door. People already think I'm half monster. If you leave and they want to add failed husband to the list, that changes nothing for me. She studied his face. The scars, the hard lines around his mouth, the gray in his hair that made him look like winter personified. How old are you? She asked suddenly. 42. You look older. Hard living. He said it without self-pity, just fact. The scars? Border wars, property disputes, one very stupid decision involving a bear. Despite everything, she almost smiled. A bear? I was 19 and drunk. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And now? Now I'm 42 and sober, and I avoid bears. The absurdity of it cracked something in her chest. Here she was, sitting across from the Iron Duke, the monster of the moors, discussing his ill-advised youth and bear-related regrets. What happened to it? She asked. The bear. Won the fight, decisively. I learned humility. Is that what you call this? She gestured at his face. Humility. I call it surviving my own stupidity long enough to learn better. The carriage rattled over rough ground. The fog had thickened even more, pressing against the windows like it wanted in. Elira could barely see anything outside, just shapes, shadows, the occasional dark bulk of a stone that might have been a marker or might have been nothing. How long until we reach your estate? She asked. 4 hours, maybe 5, depending on the weather. 5 hours trapped in the carriage with a man she'd married an hour ago. A man she didn't know, didn't trust, couldn't read. Tell me about it, she said. The estate. What should I expect? Corvin was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. It's old, he said finally. Built 3 generations ago by my grandfather. Stone construction, built to last. It sits on the edge of the high moors about 2 miles from the nearest village. Defensible position which mattered back then. Less important now, but the architecture remains. You're saying it's a fortress. I'm saying it's sturdy. How many people live there, including you? 14. Mrs. Haver, the housekeeper, Thomas, the groundskeeper, 6 house staff, maids, cook, general work, 2 stable hands, and Garrett, my steward. The 2 men who were at the chapel. That's 13. I can count. You said 14. You're 14. Right, she kept forgetting. She lived there now. Do they know? She asked. About this? About the arrangement? They know I married you. They don't need to know more than that. So I'm supposed to pretend, play the happy wife. You're supposed to do whatever makes you comfortable. His voice was patient, too patient, like he was handling glass. If you want to hide in your rooms and never speak to anyone, fine. If you want to take meals with the staff and learn everyone's life story, also fine. There are no expectations, Elira. No performance required. She wanted to believe him. The wanting scared her almost as much as the doubt. You keep saying that, she said quietly. No expectations. Nothing required. But everyone wants something. What do you want? Corvin held her gaze for a long, measured moment. Peace, he said finally. I want to live my life without interference. I want my lands managed well and my borders secure. I want to wake up in the morning and not have to fight anyone or prove anything or justify my existence to people who've already decided what I am. He paused. And I wanted to keep you away from men who would have destroyed you. That's it. That's the whole list. Peace, she repeated. That's really all. It's harder to achieve than you'd think. The carriage hit a rut, throwing her sideways. She caught herself against the wall, her heart jumping. Corvin didn't move, perfectly balanced despite the rough terrain. We're on the moor roads now. They're not maintained well. It'll be rougher for the next hour. Wonderful. There's a blanket under the seat if you're cold. She was, actually. The fog had brought a damp chill that seeped through her thin dress like water through cloth. She reached under the seat and found a thick wool blanket, plain and scratchy, but warm. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Silence settled again, but different this time. Less hostile, more uncertain, like neither of them quite knew what to do with the other. Elira pulled the blanket around her shoulders and watched the fog roll past. Somewhere in that gray nothing was her old life. The town, the chapel, Marta, all of it. Already it felt impossibly far away. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Earlier, at the chapel, why were you late? Corvin's jaw tightened fractionally. I wasn't late. You were 20 minutes, I was outside, in the fog, trying to decide if this was the right move. That stopped her cold. What? I'm not in the habit of acquiring wives, he said dryly, or making life-altering decisions for other people. I spent 20 minutes standing outside that chapel asking myself if this was help or harm, if I was actually protecting you or just collecting you for my own reasons. And I decided that even if my motives aren't pure, the outcome was still better than the alternative. He met her eyes. But it was a close call. The honesty of it hit her like a punch. She'd expected arrogance, certainty, the absolute confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. She hadn't expected doubt. What would you have done, she asked, if you decided not to go through with it? Paid the debts anyway, set you up somewhere safe, arranged protection through other means. He shrugged. There are always alternatives. They just would have been messier. So this was the clean option. This was the option that kept you legally untouchable while giving me a justifiable reason to end anyone who tried anyway. The casual way he said that, end anyone, sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. You'd really do that? She asked. Kill someone over me? Over you? No, we just met. His voice was flat, practical. But over the principle of a man violating an agreement I'd made and threatening someone under my protection? Absolutely, without hesitation. That's honest, he finished, which is more than most people will give you. He wasn't wrong. The carriage rattled on. Outside, the landscape had turned even more hostile. Nothing but rocks and scrub grass as far as she could see through the fog. No trees, no shelter, just endless gray moor stretching in every direction. Do you ever get lonely? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Corvin looked at her, expression unreadable. Yes. Is that why you agreed to this? The marriage? No. Then why? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. 6 weeks ago, I was at a territorial council meeting. Routine business, land agreements, trade disputes. Boring. He shifted, crossing his arms. One of the other lords brought up your father's debts, started discussing options for resolving the situation, the way they talked about you, like you were cargo, a problem to solve. It made me... He stopped, started again. It reminded me of things I'd rather forget. What things? Not my story to tell. Not yet. His eyes were distant. But I left that meeting and had my steward start making inquiries. Found out about the offers, the men circling, and I thought... He trailed off. What? Elira pressed. What did you think? I thought, here's a chance to do something right for once. To use the weight of my name and my reputation for something other than fear. He looked at her directly. I thought maybe I could stop something bad before it started. That's all. The simplicity of it was almost worse than any complicated scheme would have been. So I'm a project, she said. Your good deed. You're a person who deserved better options than the ones you were given. He didn't flinch from her gaze. If that makes you a project, fine, but at least you're a project with your own rooms and a way out. She didn't know what to say to that. The carriage lurched again, harder this time. Through the window, she could see the fog starting to thin. Shapes emerged from the gray, low stone walls, a scatter of buildings, the dark outline of something bigger on the horizon. We're close, Corvin said. Elira's stomach twisted. This was it. The point of no return. Except it wasn't, was it? He'd given her an exit. 6 months. She could survive 6 months. She could survive anything for 6 months. The fog parted like a curtain, and suddenly she could see it. Hale Estate, rising from the moors like something that had grown there instead of being built. Dark stone, multiple levels, narrow windows that looked like eyes, walls that could probably withstand a siege, gates that looked like they were designed to keep the world out, or keep prisoners in. It's not as bad as it looks, Corvin said quietly. It looks like a prison. I know, but it's warmer inside, and Mrs. Haver makes excellent bread. Despite everything, that almost made her laugh. Here was the Iron Duke, monster of the frontier, trying to sell her on his fortress prison with promises of good bread. The gates opened as they approached. The carriage rolled through, wheels crunching on gravel. Elira's heart pounded against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. She was about to step into a life she'd never wanted with a man she didn't know, trusting a bargain made in fog and fear. The carriage stopped. Corvin opened the door and stepped out first, then turned back, offering his hand. She looked at it, at the calluses, at the scars on his knuckles that spoke of violence survived, at the carefully neutral expression on his face that hid everything she needed to know. Then she took his hand and stepped down into her new life. The courtyard was stone, practical, designed for defense, not beauty. Staff had gathered near the entrance, the people Corvin had mentioned, she assumed. They watched her with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. An older woman stepped forward, tall, gray-haired, with sharp eyes and a sharper jaw. Your Grace, she said, nodding to Corvin. Then to Elira. My lady, welcome to Hale Estate. I'm Mrs. Haver. Hello? Elira managed. Her voice sounded small in the vast courtyard. Mrs. Haver's expression softened fractionally. You must be exhausted from the journey. I've prepared the East Wing rooms for you, if you'll follow me. Elira looked at Corvin. He nodded once. Go, he said quietly. Get settled. I'll have dinner sent up to your rooms unless you'd prefer to eat in the hall. My rooms, she said quickly, too quickly. If he was offended, his face didn't show it. As you wish. Mrs. Haver will show you everything. If you need anything at all, ask her. Then he turned and walked away, his coat billowing behind him like a shadow. Elira watched him go, feeling unmoored, lost. This way, my lady. Mrs. Haver's voice was kind but firm. Let's get you warm and fed. Everything else can wait. Elira followed her into the fortress. The door closed behind them with a sound like finality, and her new life began. The East Wing smelled like lavender and old stone. Mrs. Haver led Elira through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, their footsteps echoing off walls thick enough to withstand cannon fire. Narrow windows let in slices of gray light that did nothing to warm the place. Everything was stone and shadow, built for endurance, not comfort. The Duke had these rooms prepared last week, Mrs. Haver said, her voice crisp and matter-of-fact. He was very specific about the arrangements. Elira's throat tightened. What kind of specific? You'll see. They stopped at a heavy wooden door with iron fixtures. Mrs. Haver produced a key from the ring at her belt, turned the lock, and pushed the door open. The room beyond stole Elira's breath. It wasn't grand. Nothing about Hale Estate was grand in the decorative sense, but it was hers. Completely, unmistakably hers. A sitting room opened before her, furnished simply but well. A sofa near the fireplace, already lit and crackling. Bookshelves along one wall, half filled with volumes that looked actually read, not just decorative. A writing desk by the window with paper, ink, everything ready. Thick rugs covered the stone floor, deep blue and cream, softening the harshness. Through here's the bedroom, Mrs. Haver continued, moving to another door. And the bathing room beyond that. We've updated the plumbing in this wing, hot water from the boiler, very modern. The Duke insisted. Elira followed her through. The bedroom was larger than her entire room had been at her father's house. A bed big enough for 3 people dominated the space, piled with quilts and pillows. More rugs, a wardrobe that stood open, revealing dresses already hanging inside. "Those are for you," Mrs. Haver said, noticing her stare. "The Duke had them made based on, well, on estimates. If they don't fit, we'll have the seamstress adjust them. She's in the village, comes twice a week. He had dresses made for me." Elira's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Before the wedding. Before he even sent the offer to your aunt, actually." Mrs. Haver's expression was unreadable. He's thorough when he makes decisions. Or controlling, Elira thought. But she didn't say it. The bathing room was the final surprise, a proper tub, large and deep, with brass fixtures that gleamed in the lamplight, towels stacked neatly on shelves, soap that smelled like rosemary, and something else, something clean and expensive. "I don't understand," Elira said quietly. "This is too much. All of it." Mrs. Haver studied her for a long moment. "The Duke has his reasons for everything he does. Whether those reasons make sense to the rest of us is irrelevant." She moved to the fireplace in the sitting room, checking the fire with practiced efficiency. "Dinner will be brought up at 7. Is there anything specific you'd like?" I don't know. Whatever's being made is fine. The cook is preparing roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables. Simple fare. We're not fancy here." "That sounds good. Thank you." Mrs. Haver nodded, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out 2 keys on a silver ring. "These are yours. One for the outer door, one for the bedroom. The Duke has no copies." Elira stared at the keys. "He doesn't have access to my rooms?" "Not without your permission. Those were his explicit instructions." Mrs. Haver pressed the keys into Elira's hand. "My quarters are in the south wing if you need anything during the night. 3rd door on the left. Don't hesitate." Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Elira stood alone in her new rooms, holding 2 keys that felt heavier than they should. She walked slowly through the space again, touching things. The books, classics, poetry, some newer novels she'd heard about but never read. The desk had good paper, the expensive kind that didn't tear easily. The wardrobe held not just dresses, but undergarments, stockings, a warm cloak lined with fur. He'd thought of everything. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made her skin crawl with questions she couldn't answer. Why go to this trouble for someone he didn't know? Why the keys, the privacy, the careful distance? What did he actually want? She moved to the window and looked out. The view showed the moors stretching away into fog and distance, broken only by low stone walls and the occasional dark shape of an outbuilding. No other houses, no neighbors, nothing but isolation in every direction. A cage with comfortable furniture was still a cage. Elira turned away from the window and caught sight of herself in the mirror above the writing desk. She looked wrong, pale, exhausted, still wearing the borrowed wedding dress that didn't fit. Her hair had started to fall from its pins, strands escaping around her face. She looked like exactly what she was, a girl playing at being a duchess, wearing someone else's life. She stripped off the dress, letting it fall to the floor in a puddle of lace and lies. The corset underneath had left red marks on her ribs. She unlaced it with shaking fingers and threw it aside. In just her shift, she felt more like herself, less like property. The wardrobe called to her. She found a simple dress, dark green, wool that would actually keep her warm. It fit well enough. A little loose in the waist, a little tight in the shoulders, but wearable. Whoever had done the estimates had gotten close. She was pinning up her hair when someone knocked on the door. "My lady?" A young voice, female. "I have your dinner." Elira opened the door to find a girl maybe 16 years old, carrying a tray that smelled like heaven. Round face, nervous eyes, wearing a maid's uniform that looked new. "Come in," Elira said, stepping aside. The girl entered carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something. She set the tray on the low table near the fireplace and started arranging things with practiced efficiency. "I'm Annie, my lady. I'll be attending to your rooms. If you need anything, just ring." She pointed to a bell pull near the door. "Someone will come." "Thank you, Annie." The girl bobbed a curtsy and headed for the door, then hesitated. "My lady, can I say something?" "Of course." Annie turned back, worrying her hands together. "The Duke, people say things about him, but he's not cruel, not to us. He pays fair wages, never raises his voice, always says please and thank you, even though he doesn't have to. And when my brother got sick last winter, His Grace paid for the physician. Didn't ask for anything back, just did it." Elira didn't know what to say to that. "I just thought you should know," Annie finished quietly. "In case you were scared. You don't have to be. Not here." Then she was gone, door clicking shut behind her. Elira stood there for a long moment, processing. Then she sat down and ate. The food was good. Better than good. Simple and well prepared, seasoned perfectly, still hot. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. The chicken fell off the bone. The potatoes were crispy on the outside, soft inside. Even the vegetables tasted like someone had cared about making them right. She ate everything, then sat staring into the fire. The day crashed over her all at once. The wedding, the carriage ride, this room, these keys, a husband who gave her privacy and asked for nothing and claimed he just wanted peace. None of it made sense. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt suspended, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The fire crackled. Outside, night had fallen properly, turning the windows into black mirrors. Elira caught her reflection again. A stranger in a strange room, in a house that felt like a fortress at the end of the world. She went to bed early, exhausted but unable to sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, everything too much and not enough at the same time. She lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to gray morning light and someone knocking. "My lady, it's Annie. I have breakfast." Elira stumbled out of bed, pulling on a robe she'd found in the wardrobe. "Come in." Annie entered with another tray, bread, butter, jam, tea that smelled like bergamot and smoke. She set it down and started opening curtains, letting in weak sunlight that did nothing to improve the view. "Mrs. Haver asked me to tell you that you're welcome to explore the house and grounds as you please," Annie said. "The library is on the ground floor, west corridor. The conservatory is attached to the south wing, though it's mostly empty this time of year. And if you want to walk outside, there are paths marked with stones. Don't stray from them. The moors can be dangerous if you don't know them." "Noted." Elira poured tea, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Where's the Duke?" "His Grace takes breakfast in his study, my lady. 5th floor, North Tower. He's usually there until noon working on estate business." "Does he ever eat with the household?" Annie looked uncomfortable. "Not usually, my lady. He prefers to work." Or he preferred to avoid people. Elira was starting to see a pattern. She spent the morning exploring. The house was enormous, a maze of corridors and staircases that seemed designed to confuse. She found the library first, a cavernous room with shelves that reached the ceiling and a rolling ladder to access them. Thousands of books, maybe tens of thousands, organized by some system she couldn't immediately decode. She pulled down a volume at random. Poetry. Old, leather-bound, the pages soft with age. Someone had made notes in the margins, neat handwriting that analyzed meter and meaning. Corvin's handwriting, she realized. He'd actually read these books. She kept exploring. Found the conservatory. Annie was right. It was mostly empty. Just a few hardy plants surviving the northern climate. Found a music room with a piano that looked untouched. A dining hall big enough to seat 40 that clearly hadn't been used in years. A dozen other rooms whose purposes she couldn't even guess. The house felt hollow, like it was waiting for something that had never arrived. By noon, she was back in her rooms, restless and unsettled. She'd seen no one except Annie and a maid who'd hurried past without speaking. No sign of Corvin, no sign of much of anything except empty space and silence. She was staring out the window when she heard it, voices rising from somewhere below. Angry voices. Elira moved to the door, opening it quietly. The sound was coming from down the corridor, louder now. A man shouting, the words unclear but the fury unmistakable. Then another voice, low and cold. Corvin. She shouldn't eavesdrop. She should close the door and mind her own business. Instead, she followed the sound. It led her to a staircase, down 2 floors, to a corridor she hadn't explored yet. The voices were coming from behind a partially open door at the end. Completely unacceptable, the shouting man. You can't just ignore the council's requests. I can, and I will. Corvin's voice, flat and uncompromising. The answer is no, Mercier. It was no last month, it's no now, it'll be no next month when you come back with the same request. The trade route would benefit everyone. It would benefit you and 3 other lords who want access to my northern borders. Meanwhile, it would destroy the watershed that keeps my lands viable and displace 2 villages worth of people who've lived there for generations. No. You're being unreasonable. I'm being final. Get out of my house. Footsteps. Heavy, angry, moving toward the door. Elira stepped back into a doorway, heart hammering. A man stormed past. Middle-aged, expensive clothes, face red with rage. He didn't see her, too focused on his fury. She waited until he was gone, then moved closer to the door he'd left from. Corvin stood inside what looked like an office, hands braced on a desk covered in papers and maps. His jaw was tight, shoulders tense. He looked exhausted. You can come in, he said without looking up. I know you're there. Elira's stomach dropped. She stepped into the doorway. How? You have a distinctive step, light, hesitant. Now he looked up. And you're the only person in this house who has any reason to be exploring this wing. I wasn't spying. You were absolutely spying. The corner of his mouth twitched. But I don't blame you. Mercier has a voice that carries. What did he want? Permission to destroy part of my land for profit. He'll be back with the same request in a few weeks. Phrased differently. They always come back. He straightened, rolling his shoulders like they ached. How are you settling in? The question caught her off guard. Fine. The rooms they're good. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. They're yours. Still. Silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Would you like to see the rest of the estate? Corvin asked abruptly. The parts Annie probably didn't mention. Like what? The actual working parts. The stables, the forge, the granaries, the places that keep this fortress functioning. It was the last thing she'd expected him to suggest. Why? Because you live here now. You should know how it works. He moved around the desk, grabbing a coat from a hook on the wall. And because I suspect you're going stir-crazy in those rooms, no matter how nice they are. He wasn't wrong. All right, she said, show me. They walked through the house in silence, taking a different route than Elira had explored. Corvin moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew every stone, every turn, every shortcut. Servants they passed nodded respectfully, but didn't try to engage him. He clearly preferred it that way. Outside, the day had turned cold and sharp. Wind whipped across the courtyard, bringing the smell of moor grass and rain coming from the north. Storm tonight, Corvin said, noticing her shiver. Big one. The barometer's been dropping all morning. The stables were warm by comparison, filled with the smell of hay and horse. 8 stalls half occupied. A stable hand, one of the men from the wedding, Elira realized, looked up and nodded. Thomas, Corvin said. This is my wife, Elira. She'll be visiting when she likes. Answer any questions she has. Thomas blinked, clearly surprised, but recovered quickly. Of course, Your Grace. My lady. Corvin moved to one of the occupied stalls and pulled out an apple from his pocket. A massive gray horse stuck its head over the door and took the offering with surprising delicacy. This is Granite, Corvin said. 15 years old, temperament like his name, completely loyal once he decides you're worth his time. Do you ride often? Elira asked. Every day when weather permits. It's the best way to check the borders, see what needs attention. He stroked the horse's nose absently. "You're welcome to ride if you want. Thomas can set you up with one of the gentler horses." "I don't know how." He looked at her, surprised. "Never?" "Never had reason to learn. My father didn't keep horses. We couldn't afford them." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, something closer to understanding. "Thomas can teach you," he said, "if you're interested." "Maybe." They continued the tour. The forge where a man named Samuel was repairing tools and shoeing horses. The granaries, half full with last season's harvest. The root cellars, the dovecote, the butchery. The dozen other buildings that made the estate self-sufficient. Corvin explained everything with the same patient detail, answering her questions without condescension. He knew his land, knew his people, knew exactly how everything functioned down to the smallest detail. "You really do manage all this yourself," Elira said. "With Garrett's help, yes. The steward, good man. He handles the numbers, I handle the decisions." "Don't you have stewards for the decisions too?" "I could. I don't trust them." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. "Too many agendas, too many opportunities for corruption. Easier to just do it myself." "That's a lot of work." "It's my land, my responsibility." They were walking back toward the main house when the first drops of rain started. Big, heavy drops that hit the stones like bullets. "Come on!" Corvin picked up his pace. "We'll get soaked if we don't move." They made it inside just as the sky opened properly. Rain hammered the windows, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and water. Elira stood in the entrance hall, catching her breath. Her dress was damp, hair coming loose again, but she felt more alive than she had in days. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me. All of it." Corvin shrugged out of his coat, shaking off water. "You should know what you're living in, even if it's temporary." "Right, temporary. 6 months." She'd almost forgotten. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You keep asking permission to ask questions. Just ask." "Why do you live like this? Alone, I mean. You have this huge house, all these rooms, and you barely use any of them. You eat in your study, work all day, avoid people. Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, water dripping from his hair onto the stone floor. "Because it's easier," he said finally. "People are complicated. They want things. They have expectations. They judge and gossip and create problems where none existed before. Out here, I don't have to deal with that." "But you're lonely." "Yes." He met her eyes. "But loneliness is predictable. People aren't." The honesty of it hit her hard. "That's a terrible way to live," she said quietly. "It's the way I've chosen." "Then why marry me? If you want isolation, why bring someone into your house?" "I told you, to protect you from—" "I know what you told me." She stepped closer, frustrated. "But that's not the whole truth. There were other ways to do that. You could have paid the debts and left me alone. You could have set me up somewhere far away and never thought about me again. Instead, you brought me here. To your fortress, your isolation. Why?" The rain hammered harder. Thunder rolled across the moors. Corvin's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "Because," he said finally, voice rough, 23 years ago, my sister was in your position. Different debts, different circumstances, but the same outcome. She was 17. She married a man who promised protection and delivered cruelty. By the time I found out what was happening, by the time I could do anything about it," he stopped, swallowed hard. "She died when she was 19, same age you are now." The air left Elira's lungs. "I couldn't save her," Corvin continued, each word sounding like it cost him. "I was too young, too powerless, too caught up in my own problems to see what was happening until it was too late. But you?" He looked at her directly. "You, I could save. Maybe not for the right reasons. Maybe just to make myself feel like less of a failure. But I could do something, so I did." Silence fell between them, broken only by rain and distant thunder. "I'm sorry," Elira said. "About your sister." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." Something in his face cracked, just for a second. Then the walls came back up. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They stood there in the entrance hall, two strangers bound by a bargain neither had wanted, while the storm raged outside. "I should get back to work," Corvin said finally. The rain will cause flooding in the low pastures. I need to make sure the drainage channels are clear. In this weather? Especially in this weather. He started to leave, then paused. Elira? Yes? You were right, earlier, about it being a terrible way to live. His voice was quiet. But I don't know how to do it differently. Then he was gone, disappearing into the depths of the house. Elira stood alone listening to the storm, holding a truth she hadn't asked for. The Iron Duke wasn't a monster. He was just a man who'd learned to survive by keeping everyone at arm's length. And she was living in the fortress he'd built around himself. The question was, did she want to stay inside those walls or find a way to tear them down? The storm lasted 3 days. Rain fell in sheets, turning the moors into a gray sea of water and mud. Wind howled around the corners of the estate like something alive and angry. Thunder shook the windows. Lightning split the sky in jagged white scars. Elira spent the time reading in the library, wrapped in blankets, watching the weather try to tear the world apart. She saw Corvin exactly twice. Once in passing, both of them nodding silently. Once through a window, watching him cross the courtyard in the downpour to check something at the stables, returning soaked and grim. He didn't seek her out. She didn't seek him. The distance should have been comfortable. Instead, it felt wrong. On the third night, the storm reached its peak. Wind screamed, rain hammered the stones like it wanted inside. The whole house groaned and creaked under the assault. Elira lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening to the chaos. Then she heard it, a crash, loud enough to cut through the storm. Something breaking, or falling. She grabbed her robe and the candle beside her bed, then ventured into the corridor. The crash had come from above. She followed the sound up a narrow staircase she'd never explored before, climbing until she reached a door hanging half open. Inside was a room that looked like it had exploded, papers everywhere, blown by wind pouring through a shattered window. Rain soaking the floor, the furniture, everything. And in the middle of it all, Corvin trying to nail boards across the broken window while wind tore at his clothes. "What are you doing?" Elira shouted over the storm. He turned, surprised. "Get out! It's not safe!" Neither is doing this alone. She set down her candle and grabbed one end of a board he'd been struggling with. Together, they wrestled it into place while he drove nails through it. The wind fought them every step, but they won. 2 more boards. 3. 4. Finally, the window was sealed. The wind still howled outside, but the room was protected. They stood there, soaked and breathing hard. "Thank you," Corvin said. "What is this place?" He looked around at the wrecked room, something pained crossing his face. "Storage. Old family things I should have gotten rid of years ago." It was a lie. She could tell by the way he said it. She moved deeper into the room, looking at what the storm had revealed. Papers, yes, but also books, journals. A child's toy horse, wooden and old. A dress, small, laid carefully in a trunk. "This was hers," Elira said quietly. "Your sister's." Corvin didn't answer. "You kept everything. I told you to leave." "I'm not leaving." She picked up one of the journals, its pages damp but readable, opened it to a random page, a girl's handwriting, young and hopeful. "Today Corvin taught me to ride. I fell 3 times and he laughed every time, but in the nice way, not the mean way. He says I'll be better than him someday. I think he's right." Elira's throat closed up. She set the journal down carefully. "She loved you," she said. "I couldn't save her." His voice was raw. "I had all this." He gestured at the room, the house, everything. "All this power, all this land, all this weight in my name, and I couldn't save one girl who mattered more than all of it combined. So you saved me instead." "I tried." "You did." She stepped closer to him, rain-soaked and shaking. "You gave me a choice, keys, freedom, a way out. That's not trying, that's succeeding." He looked at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "But here's what I don't get," Elira continued. "You built all these walls to keep people out. You live like a ghost in your own house. You've convinced yourself that isolation is safety, but you're not safe, Corvin. You're just alone." "That's the same thing." "No, it's really not." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the foundations. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and he sounded tired. So tired. I want you to stop treating this like a transaction. You're not my savior, and I'm not your redemption project. We're just two people trying to survive in a world that's been pretty brutal to both of us. She took a breath. So maybe we could try being honest with each other. Actually honest. Not the careful, measured version you give everyone else. I have been honest. You've been controlled. There's a difference. He stared at her for a long moment, water dripping from his hair, something fierce and desperate in his eyes. You want honesty? His voice dropped, dangerous. Fine. I'm terrified of you. That stopped her cold. What? You're here. In my house. In my space. You ask questions I don't want to answer, and you look at me like you're trying to figure me out, and I don't know what to do with that. He ran a hand through his wet hair, frustrated. I know how to manage land. I know how to negotiate contracts and make threats and keep people at a distance. But an actual person who just exists here, who I can't intimidate or buy off or send away, I have no idea what to do with you. So you hide. So I give you space. Same thing. Maybe. He looked around at his sister's room, at the memories he'd preserved like a shrine. Maybe I'm just broken in ways I don't know how to fix. Elira stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Then stop trying to fix it alone, she said quietly. You gave me keys and freedom and a choice. Let me give you something back. Like what? Company? Actual human company. No expectations, no contracts, just presence. Someone who knows what it's like to be afraid and alone and trapped by circumstances. She held his gaze. We're already stuck in this marriage for 6 months. We might as well try not being miserable. I'm not miserable. You're preserving your dead sister's room like a tomb and living like a hermit in a fortress. You're absolutely miserable. He almost smiled. Almost. That's harsh. You asked for honesty. The storm howled. The boarded window held. What are you suggesting? Corvin asked carefully. I'm suggesting we try something radical. We act like people sharing a house instead of strangers in a contract. We eat dinner together sometimes. We have actual conversations. She hesitated, then pushed forward. We stop pretending this is temporary and start figuring out what it actually is. It is temporary. 6 months. Right. And in 5 months and 29 days, I'll leave and you'll go back to your isolation and we'll both pretend this never happened. Her voice sharpened. Or we could use the time we have to be less lonely. Your choice. Corvin was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then he did something that surprised her. He sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of his sister's ruined room, and put his head in his hands. I don't know how to do this, he said, voice muffled. Elira sat down beside him, close but not touching. Neither do I, she admitted. But we could figure it out together. They sat there in the wreckage while the storm raged, two people who'd survived different hells trying to find something that looked like peace. Finally, Corvin lifted his head. Dinner tomorrow, he said, in the dining hall. Not our separate rooms. Okay. And you can ask me 3 questions. Anything you want. I'll answer honestly. 3? Don't push it. She almost laughed. Deal. He stood, offering her a hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. We should clean this up, he said, looking around at the wet papers, the scattered memories. Tomorrow, in daylight, when the storm's over. Agreed. They walked back through the dark house together, her candle casting small shadows on the walls. At her door, they stopped. Elira? Corvin's voice was quiet. Yes? Thank you for coming to help, for... He trailed off, then tried again. For pushing back. Someone has to. Most people don't dare. I'm not most people. His smile was brief but real. No, you're definitely not. Then he was gone, disappearing into the fortress he'd built around himself. But something had shifted. Some wall had cracked, just slightly. And Elira lay in bed that night, listening to the storm finally break, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for inside these stone walls. The question was, would he fight back? Or would he run? She'd find out at dinner. She'd find out at dinner. Except dinner didn't happen. Elira dressed carefully that evening, choosing a deep blue dress from the wardrobe that actually fit properly. She pinned her hair up, then took it down, then put it up again because her hands needed something to do. Her reflection in the mirror looked nervous. She hated that. This was just dinner, just a meal with a man she barely knew but happened to be married to. Nothing to be anxious about, except it felt like everything. At precisely 7 o'clock, she walked to the dining hall. The long table had been set at one end, 2 places across from each other, close enough to talk without shouting down the length of polished wood. Candles burned in silver holders. The smell of roasted meat and herbs filled the air. No Corvin. She waited. 7:15, 7:30. At 7:45, Mrs. Haver appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "My lady, I apologize. The Duke sent word he's been detained. Border issue. He asked that you go ahead and eat without him." The disappointment hit harder than it should have. "What kind of border issue?" Elira asked. "I don't have details, my lady. Just that he rode out an hour ago with Thomas and won't be back until late." In this weather? The storm had broken, but the aftermath was ugly. Mud everywhere, wind still gusting hard enough to rattle windows. His Grace doesn't let weather stop him when there's a problem. Mrs. Haver's tone suggested this was a frequent occurrence. "Shall I have your dinner sent to your rooms instead?" Elira looked at the carefully set table, the candles already burning down, the meal going cold. "No," she said. "I'll eat here." She ate alone in that massive dining hall, feeling foolish. He'd agreed to dinner. He'd suggested it himself. And at the first excuse, he'd run. Or maybe it really was urgent business. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe she was just disappointed because, for a few hours last night, she'd thought they were getting somewhere. She finished her meal and went back to her rooms, anger and confusion warring in her chest. He didn't return that night. Or the next morning. By noon the following day, Elira was pacing her sitting room like a caged animal. Annie had brought breakfast and lunch, both times reporting that the Duke was still handling estate matters and would return when able. "This is normal?" Elira demanded after the lunch report. "He just disappears for days." Annie looked uncomfortable. "Sometimes, my lady, when there's trouble with the boarders or the tenants. He doesn't like delegating." "Right. Because delegating would require trusting someone." Annie didn't respond to that, just collected the dishes and left. Elira stood at her window, staring out at the moors. The aftermath of the storm had left everything muddy and gray, but the sun was trying to break through. Somewhere out there, Corvin was avoiding her, or dealing with actual problems. She genuinely couldn't tell which. The not knowing made her want to scream. She grabbed her cloak, the warm one from the wardrobe, and headed downstairs. If he wouldn't come to her, she'd find him herself. "Mrs. Haver." She found the housekeeper in the kitchens, directing staff. "Where exactly did the Duke go? Be specific." Mrs. Haver straightened, clearly weighing how much to say. "The northern border, my lady. There's a dispute about grazing rights between our tenants and Lord Wickham's. It's been ongoing for months." "How far north?" "About 8 miles. But, my lady, you shouldn't— Can Thomas saddle a horse for me?" "A gentle one." "You don't know how to ride." "Then I'll learn today." Elira's voice was hard. "Get me a horse, Mrs. Haver, please." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll have Thomas prepare Meadow. She's old and patient. But you'll take one of the stable hands with you. The moors are dangerous if you don't know them." "Fine." 20 minutes later, Elira was staring up at a horse that looked entirely too tall. "She's the smallest one we have, my lady," Thomas said apologetically. The stable hand beside him, a boy, maybe 14, named Jamie, tried not to smile. "Right. Okay. How do I get up there?" Thomas showed her. It took 3 attempts and 0 dignity, but she managed to get into the saddle. The ground looked very far away suddenly. "Heels down, back straight, hands light on the reins," Thomas instructed. "Meadow knows the northern route. She'll follow Jamie's horse. Just don't panic and you'll be fine." Elira gripped the reins, her knuckles white. Define fine. Still alive at the end. That's encouraging. Jamie led the way out of the courtyard on a sturdy brown gelding. Meadow followed without any input from Elira, which was both reassuring and terrifying. She had no control over this animal. She was just sitting there while it walked. They headed north across the moors. The landscape was bleak and beautiful in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in scrub grass, broken by stone outcroppings, and low walls built centuries ago. The The sky was still gray, but the wind had died down to something manageable. "How long to the border?" Elira called to Jamie. "Hour and a half, my lady. Maybe 2. Going slow like this." 2 hours on a horse, her legs already ached. But she'd started this. She'd finish it. They rode in silence, broken only by wind and the steady sound of hooves on muddy ground. Elira's initial terror gradually faded into discomfort, then into something almost meditative. There was a rhythm to it, the horse's movement, the sway of the saddle, the endless moors rolling past. She started to understand why Corvin did this every day. Out here, there was space. Distance from people and expectations, and all the complicated mess of actually living with others. Out here, you could breathe. They crested a hill and Jamie pulled up, pointing. "There, my lady? See the riders?" Elira squinted. In the distance, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, she could see horses. People. The shapes were too far away to identify, but there were at least a dozen of them. "That'll be His Grace's group and Lord Wickham's," Jamie said. "Looks like they're negotiating." Or arguing, Elira thought. Even from here, she could see the tense body language. "Can we get closer?" Jamie looked uncertain. "My lady, if they're in active discussion, interrupting might not be—" "I'm not interrupting. I'm observing. There's a difference." "If you say so, my lady." They rode down the hill. As they got closer, voices became audible, raised, angry, the sharp edge of a dispute that had gone on too long. "Your tenants are encroaching a full 100 yards past the marker stones." A man's voice, nasal and furious. "The marker stones were moved," Corvin's voice, cold and flat. "By your people. Last month. We have 3 witnesses who saw it happen." "That's a lie. It's documented fact. I have signed statements." Elira could see them now properly. Corvin sat on granite, his massive gray horse, flanked by Thomas and 2 other men she didn't recognize. Facing them were 6 riders in different colors, forest green trimmed with gold. The man doing the shouting was thin and sharp-faced, maybe 50, with the kind of aristocratic sneer that suggested he'd been born rich and never forgotten it. Lord Wickham, presumably. "Your witnesses are your own tenants," Wickham spat. "Of course they'll say whatever you tell them to." "My tenants don't lie because I don't ask them to." Corvin's voice could have cut glass. "Unlike some lords I could name." "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm right. Move your livestock back to your side of the actual border, compensate my tenants for the grazing they've lost, and we're done here." "I'll do no such thing. This is my land." "This is my land. Has been for 3 generations. Your grandfather sold it to mine in 1783. I have the deed in my study. Would you like to see it?" Wickham's face went purple. "You arrogant son of a—" He didn't finish. His hand dropped to his belt where a pistol hung in a holster. Everything happened fast. Thomas moved, his horse sidling in front of Corvin's. One of Wickham's men shouted a warning. Corvin's hand went to his own weapon. "Stop!" Elira's voice cut through the chaos. Every head turned. She nudged Meadow forward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was stupid. This was dangerous. But they were about to start shooting each other over a property line, and she couldn't just watch. "Lady Hale!" Corvin's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. "This isn't your concern. You're my husband. That makes it my concern." She looked at Wickham, who was staring at her like she'd materialized from thin air. "Lord Wickham, I assume?" He blinked, hand still hovering near his pistol. "Yes, and you're the new Duchess. I'd heard Hale had acquired a wife." The way he said acquired made her skin crawl. "Married," she corrected sharply. "Not acquired. There's a difference." Wickham's mouth twitched. "Of course. My apologies. Now." Elira looked between them. "From what I understand, there's a dispute about boundaries and grazing rights. My husband claims you moved marker stones. You claim his witnesses are biased. Does that cover it?" "Roughly," Corvin said. His jaw was so tight she was surprised his teeth didn't crack. "So bring in a neutral surveyor, someone from the Territorial Council. Have them verify the boundary based on the original deeds and place new markers. Both of you witness it. Problem solved." Silence. Wickham recovered first. "That's actually reasonable. I have my moments." Elira kept her voice level, even though her hands were shaking. "But here's the thing, Lord Wickham. If you draw that pistol, if this turns violent, I will personally ensure that every lord and lady in 3 territories knows you tried to murder a duke over a grazing dispute. Your reputation will be destroyed before sunset. Are we clear?" His hand dropped away from the weapon. "Crystal. Good. Duke Hale?" She looked at Corvin. "Can you agree to a neutral survey?" His expression was unreadable. "Yes." "Excellent. Lord Wickham, I assume you can contact the Territorial Council and arrange this?" Yes, I can." "Then I suggest you both go home before the weather turns again. Gentlemen." She nodded to both groups, then turned Meadow around with absolutely no grace and started back the way she'd come. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she was over the hill and out of sight. Jamie caught up to her, eyes wide. "My lady, that was stupid. I know. I was going to say brave. Same thing, usually." Behind them, she heard hoofbeats. Heavy, fast, gaining. Corvin pulled alongside on granite, his face like thunder. "What?" he said, voice deadly quiet. "Did you think you were doing?" "Stopping you from getting shot. I had it under control." "You had your hand on your pistol. That's not control, that's escalation." Wickham was bluffing. "You couldn't know that." Her voice rose. "What if he wasn't? What if he'd actually drawn? Then what?" "Then Thomas or I would have handled it. By shooting him? By starting an actual war over grazing rights?" She pulled Meadow to a stop, forcing Corvin to stop too. "That's insane." "That's reality out here." He gestured back toward the border. "These disputes don't get solved with pretty words and neutral surveys. They get solved with power, with making it clear that crossing me has consequences." "So you were willing to kill him?" "I was willing to defend my people and my land. There's a difference." "Not much of one." They glared at each other, horses dancing nervously beneath them. "You shouldn't have come," Corvin said finally. "This isn't your fight. Everything about this place is my fight now. You made it that way when you married me. For 6 months, temporary, remember?" The words hit like a slap. "Right," Elira said quietly. "Temporary. How could I forget?" She kicked Meadow into motion, or tried to. The horse just looked back at her, unimpressed. "Heels," Corvin said tiredly. "Gentle pressure with your heels." She did it. Meadow started walking. Elira kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at him. They rode in hostile silence for maybe 10 minutes before Corvin spoke again. "That was smart. What you did back there. Don't patronize me." "I'm not. It was genuinely smart. Wickham cares about his reputation more than his pride. Threatening it was the right move." "Then why are you angry?" "Because you put yourself in danger." His voice rose. "Because you rode out here with 0 experience, inserted yourself into a volatile situation, and could have gotten hurt or worse if things had gone differently. But they didn't. This time." He pulled Granite to a stop again, forcing her to stop too. "You don't know these men, Elira. You don't know what they're capable of. Wickham's younger brother shot a man over a card game last year. His cousin has 2 assault charges that got quietly buried. These aren't gentlemen playing at politics. They're dangerous. So are you, apparently." That stopped him cold. "What? You were ready to shoot him. Maybe kill him. Over property." She met his eyes. "Everyone says you're dangerous, Corvin, the Iron Duke, the monster of the moors. But I didn't really believe it until today." His jaw worked. "And now I don't know what I think." The honesty hurt coming out. "You gave me keys and freedom and asked for nothing. You told me about your sister. You let me into parts of your life I know you don't show anyone. And then you ride out here ready to kill a man over a boundary dispute like it's nothing. It's not nothing, it's survival. No, it's the excuse you use to stay isolated and afraid." The words hung between them like a blade. "I am not afraid," Corvin said, voice low and dangerous. "Yes, you are. You're terrified. Of connection, of trust, of letting anyone get close enough to hurt you again. So you live out here in your fortress, and you handle everything yourself, and you keep everyone at a distance with threats and cold stares and the reputation you've built like armor. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" She leaned forward in the saddle, ignoring the discomfort. "You agreed to have dinner with me. 1 dinner. And at the first excuse you ran. You've been gone for almost 2 days over a dispute that could have been handled by your steward. You're avoiding me, Corvin. Admit it. I'm doing my job. You're hiding. From what? From this, she gestured between them. From the possibility that maybe we could actually be friends, or at least not strangers. You're scared that if you let me in, I'll hurt you, or leave, or die like your sister did. So you're maintaining distance and telling yourself it's about boundaries and duty when really it's just fear. His face had gone pale. You have no right. I have every right. You married me. You brought me into your house, gave me those pretty speeches about protection and freedom, and then you hid from me the second things got real. Her voice cracked. I tried, Corvin. I pushed back like you asked. I came to help during the storm. I suggested we try being honest with each other. And you ran. I had responsibilities. You had an excuse. There's a difference. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. Neither of them moved. What do you want from me? Corvin's voice was raw. You want me to pretend we're a real married couple? Play house in that fortress like this is normal? I want you to stop lying to both of us about what this is. And what is it? I don't know. The admission burst out of her. I don't know what this is or what it could be, but I know it's not nothing, and I know that running away and hiding behind your reputation isn't going to work forever. They stared at each other, years of survival instinct and walls and fear stacked between them. I don't know how to do this, Corvin said finally. The defeat in his voice was worse than anger. I know, you keep saying that, because it's true. Then learn. She steadied her voice. We have 6 months, remember? Use them. Figure out how to be around another person without treating it like a business transaction or a threat. And if I can't, then I'll leave in 6 months and you'll go back to being alone and nothing will have changed. She paused. But at least you'll know you tried. Silence stretched. A bird called somewhere in the distance, lonely and sharp. One condition, Corvin said. What? You learn to ride properly, with Thomas, every other day, minimum. His voice was firm. If you're going to charge into dangerous situations, you should at least be able to control your horse while doing it. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Deal. And you stay away from border disputes. No promises. Elira, you don't get to control me, remember? That was the whole point of the keys. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. They started riding again, heading back toward the estate. The tension had shifted into something more bearable. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. The dinner invitation still stands, Corvin said after a while. Tonight, if you're willing, and you'll actually show up this time. Yes? Even if there's another emergency? Even then, Garrett can handle it. That was probably the biggest concession he'd made yet. Okay, Elira said. Tonight. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but different this time. Less like strangers, more like two people trying to figure out how to be in the same space without destroying each other. The estate appeared on the horizon, dark and imposing against the gray sky. Home, Elira thought, then corrected herself. Temporary home. 6 months. Except it was starting to feel like more than that. That night, Corvin showed up to dinner. He arrived exactly at 7, wearing clean clothes and looking nervous in a way that was almost endearing. Elira was already seated, wearing the blue dress again, her stomach in knots. You came, she said. I said I would. He sat down across from her, movements careful like he was handling explosives. I keep my word. Eventually. That's fair? Mrs. Haver appeared with the first course, soup, hearty, and rich. She set down the bowls and disappeared without comment. They ate in awkward silence for a few minutes. This is terrible, Elira said finally. Corvin looked up. The soup? No, the awkwardness. We fought for 20 minutes on the moors and now we can't even make conversation over dinner? I'm not good at conversation. Try anyway. You promised me 3 questions, remember? Back during the storm. His expression turned wary. I remember. Then I'm asking, question 1. Why did you really avoid me for 2 days? He set down his spoon carefully. I told you, border dispute. Corvin. He was silent for a long moment, jaw working. Then he sighed. Because you were right. he said quietly. In the storm, in that room with my sister's things. You were right about the walls and the isolation and all of it, and that terrified me. Why? Because I've spent 20 years building those walls. They keep me safe, keep people out, keep me from... He trailed off. From what? From caring, from getting attached to someone who could leave or die or just disappear. His hands clenched on the table. After my sister, I swore I'd never let anyone get that close again. Never give anyone that much power over me. And then you showed up, and within 3 days you were already cracking the foundation. Elira's throat tightened. I'm not trying to hurt you. I know, that's what makes it worse. He met her eyes. If you were trying, I could defend against it, but you're just being human, being honest, pushing back when I push you away. And I don't know how to handle that. So you ran. So I ran. He picked up his spoon again, not eating, just holding it. Stupid, in retrospect. Very stupid. Don't gloat. I'm absolutely gloating. She took a sip of soup. Question 2. What happened with your sister? The whole story, not just the pieces you gave me before. His face closed off. That's not... You said 3 questions. Any questions. You promised. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then he started talking. Her name was Elaine, 3 years younger than me. Brilliant, kind, everything I wasn't. His voice was flat, like he was reciting facts to keep the emotion out. When I was 19, I left to join the border wars. Stupid, reckless, looking for glory. I was gone for 2 years. When I came back, she was married to a lord named Halverson, 43 years old, wealthy, respected. And cruel? And cruel. He stared at his soup. She didn't tell me at first. Wore long sleeves, smiled when people asked how she was. Played the dutiful wife. It took me 6 months to realize what was happening. By then, his voice cracked. By then she was so far gone I couldn't reach her. What did you do? I challenged him, demanded he let her go. He refused, said she was his wife, his property, none of my business. Corvin's hands were shaking now. So I went to the territorial council, filed formal complaints, gathered evidence, did everything the legal way. And while I was doing that, while I was following the rules, he killed her. Elira's breath caught. Corvin made it look like she fell down the stairs. Tragic accident. His voice was hollow. Everyone believed him. No charges, no consequences. He walked free, and she was buried, and I... He stopped. Breathed. I was 19 when I left, 23 when I got her killed by being too slow, too trusting, too stupid to realize that rules don't protect people from monsters. That's not your fault, isn't it? He finally looked at her. I left her. I chose glory over family. I came back too late. I tried to save her through proper channels instead of just taking her away. Consequences be damned. Every choice I made was wrong. You were young. You didn't know. I should have. The rawness in his voice could have stripped paint. So yes, that's why I live like this, why I don't trust easily, why I handle everything myself and keep everyone at arm's length. Because the one time I trusted the system, the one time I believed in doing things the right way, my sister died. Silence fell between them, heavy with grief that had never properly healed. What happened to Halverson? Elira asked quietly. Corvin's smile was cold. He died. 3 years later. Fell from his horse during a hunt. Tragic accident. The way he said it made it very clear it had been no accident. Good, Elira said. He blinked, surprised. Good? He killed your sister. He deserved worse than a fall. She held his gaze. I'm not going to judge you for that, Corvin. Some people deserve what they get. Something in his face shifted, softened, just barely. Question 3? He asked. Not yet. I'm saving it. She finished her soup. But I have a non-question statement. I'm listening. I'm not your sister. I'm not going to break, and I'm not going to die, and I'm not going to disappear if you let yourself care about me. She leaned forward. You've already saved me from the monsters, remember? By marrying me, by bringing me here. You don't have to protect me from yourself. You don't know that. I know you're not Halverson. I know you gave me keys and freedom when you could have taken everything. I know you're terrified and damaged and hiding behind walls built from grief. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand. But I also know you're trying, and that matters. Corvin stared at her hand so close to his. I don't know what this is, he said quietly. This thing between us. Neither do I. But maybe we could stop trying to define it and just let it be whatever it becomes. That's terrifying. Everything good is. They sat there in the candlelight, the remains of dinner between them, years of pain and fear and survival slowly cracking under the weight of honesty. All right, Corvin said finally. We try. No running, no hiding. We use the 6 months to figure out what this is. And if it's nothing, then at least we'll know. And if it's something, his smile was small but real, then we'll deal with that when it happens. The moment stretched, fragile and new. Then the dining hall door slammed open. Garrett stood there, the steward breathing hard like he'd run the whole way. Your Grace, we have a problem. Corvin was on his feet instantly. What kind of problem? Riders, coming from the south, fast, armed. Garrett's face was grim. It's the men you turned away. The ones who made offers for Lady Elira before your marriage. Elira's blood went cold. How many? Corvin's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. 8, maybe 10. They're an hour out, maybe less. Get Thomas. Get everyone who can fight. Secure the gates. Corvin was already moving toward the door. Get my wife to her rooms and lock the doors. No, Elira stood up. I'm not hiding. This isn't a debate. You're right, it's not. She stepped in front of him. These men are here because of me, because you married me and took away their claim. I'm not going to hide in my rooms while you fight my battles. Elira, I'm staying. Deal with it. Outside in the distance, they heard it. Hoofbeats, thunder on the ground, getting closer. Corvin looked at her, something fierce and desperate in his eyes. If anything happens to you, nothing's going to happen to me. We'll handle this together. The hoofbeats grew louder. The men who'd wanted to own her were coming. And Elira Hale wasn't running anymore. Corvin's face went through several emotions in quick succession. Anger, fear, something that looked almost like pride, before settling on grim determination. Fine, he said, but you stay behind me. Always. Understood? Understood. He turned to Garrett. How long do we have? 40 minutes. Maybe less if they're pushing hard. Get everyone into the main hall, staff included. I want a count of who can fight and who needs protecting. Corvin was already moving, his voice sharp with command. Thomas brings all available weapons from the armory, swords, pistols, rifles if we have them. Mrs. Haver, secure the kitchen knives and anything else that could be used defensively. Your Grace. Mrs. Haver had appeared in the doorway, her face pale but steady. Do it. Now! He looked at Elira. Come with me. They ran through the corridors, Garrett and Mrs. Haver peeling off to their assigned tasks. Corvin led Elira up 2 flights of stairs to a room she'd never seen before. Small, windowless, with walls covered in locked cabinets. The armory. He unlocked the first cabinet and started pulling out weapons. 2 pistols, already loaded. A rifle. A short sword that looked like it had seen actual use. He handed her one of the pistols. Do you know how to use this? He asked. No. Pointed at what you want to hit. Pull the trigger. It kicks hard, so brace yourself. He demonstrated the stance. Don't fire unless you absolutely have to. 1 shot, then it needs reloading, and we won't have time for that. Elira took the pistol. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold metal that felt wrong in her hands. I've never shot anyone, she said. Hopefully you won't have to tonight. He loaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. But if it comes down to you or them, don't hesitate. These men won't. They headed back downstairs. The main hall was filling with people. The household staff, the stable hands, Thomas with an armful of weapons, even the cook carrying a cleaver that looked capable of splitting skulls. 14 people total, against 8 or 10 armed riders. The math wasn't good. All right, listen up. Corvin's voice cut through the nervous murmurs. We have hostile riders incoming. Men with no legal right to be here, but plenty of illegal intent. They're likely coming for my wife, though they might claim other grievances to justify violence. What do they want with her? Annie asked, her young face scared. To take her. to claim what they think they're owed. Corvin's voice went hard as iron. That's not happening. We're going to make that very clear. How? Thomas stepped forward. Your Grace, we're outnumbered. If they're determined, then we use the terrain. Corvin moved to the center of the hall, where a large rug covered the stone floor. He kicked it aside, revealing something Elira hadn't noticed before: iron rings set into the floor. This estate was built during the border wars. The original Duke Hale was paranoid and thorough. There are defenses built into the structure itself. He grabbed one of the iron rings and pulled. A section of floor lifted, revealing a gap underneath. Trapdoor? Garrett asked. Reinforcement channels. They run under the main approach to the gates. We can flood them with oil, light them if necessary, create a wall of fire between us and anyone trying to breach. Corvin looked around the room. It's a last resort, but it's an option. What's the first resort? Mrs. Haver's voice was steady despite her white knuckles. Negotiation from a position of strength. Corvin straightened. They expect me to hide behind walls and wait for them to make demands. Instead, we meet them at the gates. Show numbers, show weapons. Make it clear that taking this estate will cost blood they're not willing to spill. And if they don't care about the cost? Elira asked. Corvin met her eyes. Then we make them care. The hoofbeats were audible now, even from inside, getting closer. Positions, Corvin ordered. Thomas, take 3 men to the gatehouse. Visible, but protected. Rifles if possible. Garrett, you're with me at the main gate. Mrs. Haver, take Annie and the younger staff to the cellar. Lock it from inside. Don't come out until you hear the all clear from me personally. I'm staying, Annie said, her voice shaking but firm. I can fight. You're 16. I'm strong and I'm angry. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the cook. And Lady Elira is kind to me. I'm not hiding while someone tries to take her. Corvin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Stay behind cover. Don't engage unless you have no choice. Yes, Your Grace. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Elira's heart hammered against her ribs. The pistol in her hand felt simultaneously too heavy and too light, a thing that could end lives or save them depending on who pulled the trigger first. Elira. Corvin's hand caught her arm, gentle despite the circumstances. You don't have to do this. You can still go to the cellar. No one would think less of you. I would. She met his eyes. These men are here because of me. I'm not hiding from that. Something in his expression cracked. If anything happens to you, then you'll avenge me terribly and tell people stories about how I went down fighting. She tried to smile. It came out wrong. But let's not get to that part. Deal. They moved to the main entrance. The massive wooden doors were already barred from inside, iron reinforcements visible in the flickering lamplight. Thomas and his men were visible through the narrow windows of the gatehouse, rifles ready. The hoofbeats stopped. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. Then a voice called out from beyond the walls. Male, confident, familiar in a way that made Elira's stomach turn. Duke Hale, we've come to talk. Corvin moved to a speaking grill set into the wall, another remnant of the estate's defensive design. Then talk. From out there. That's not very hospitable. You're not guests. State your business or leave. A pause. Then, we're here about your wife. She's not your concern. Actually, she is. A different voice now, older, with a rasp like smoke damage. We had agreements in place, legal contracts. You interfered with commerce and legal negotiation. That's grounds for complaint. Elira recognized that voice. The shipping magnate, the one who'd come to meet with Marta drunk and made promises that had sent her running to vomit in the garden. Rage, hot and bright, cut through her fear. She stepped forward before Corvin could stop her and spoke through the grill herself. You had no agreements, her voice rang out clear and hard. You had predatory offers made to a desperate woman about a girl who was never yours to claim. I made my choice. I chose my husband. That's the end of it. Silence from outside. Then laughter, cruel, mocking. The little bird has a voice, the shipping magnate said. How charming. Tell me, girl, did Hale explain what he paid for you? 60,000 marks. That's more than your father made in his entire life. You're quite the investment. I'm not an investment. I'm a person. A person who belongs to whoever can afford her. I belong to myself. The words burst out of her, furious and raw. I chose this marriage. I chose him, and I'll choose to put a bullet through anyone who tries to change that. More laughter, but it sounded less certain now. Big words from behind walls, a third voice called. Young, cocky. Why don't you come out here and say that to our faces? Because I'm not stupid, Elira shot back. And because you don't deserve the courtesy of a face-to-face conversation. You're cowards with money who think women are commodities. I'd rather talk to the horses. At least they're honest about being animals. Dead silence. Then Corvin leaned close to the grill, his voice carrying deadly quiet. My wife has said her piece. Now hear mine. You have 60 seconds to turn around and leave. After that, I consider you hostile invaders and defend my property accordingly. That means fire. That means blood. That means I use every resource at my disposal to ensure none of you make it home to brag about your failed attempt. You're outnumbered, Hale. Am I? How many men do you think I have inside these walls? How many rifles are pointed at you right now through windows you can't even see? How many ways do you think this estate can kill you before you ever reach the door? His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. I've survived border wars and property disputes that made grown men weep. Your merchants and landowners playing at violence. You are outmatched. Another pause. Elira could hear murmuring from outside. The riders discussing, arguing. We have legal standing. The shipping magnate tried again, but his voice had lost its confidence. The Territorial Council will side with me, Corvin cut him off. I have documented proof of every transaction. I have witnesses. I have lawyers who make careers out of destroying men like you. But more importantly, I have a legal wife and the absolute right to defend her from anyone who threatens her safety. You want to test that in court? Fine. We'll see each other at the next council session. But if you try to test it here, tonight, with weapons and threats, you'll lose more than the legal argument. The murmuring grew louder, more heated. He's bluffing, someone said, not quite quiet enough. Is he? Another voice answered. Look at the gatehouse. Those are rifles, real ones. And Hale didn't build a reputation on empty threats. We came all this way. And we can leave all this way with our lives intact. I didn't sign up to die over a girl who's already married. The arguing continued. Elira found herself holding her breath, pistol gripped so tight her hand ached. Finally, the shipping magnate spoke again, defeat obvious in his tone. This isn't over, Hale. The council will hear about this. Looking forward to it, Corvin replied coldly. Now get off my land before I change my mind about letting you leave vertical. The sound of horses shifting, turning, hoofbeats, but retreating this time instead of advancing. They were leaving. Elira sagged against the wall, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Stay alert, Corvin ordered quietly to his people. Thomas, keep watch until they're over the hill and out of sight. Garrett, verify the perimeter. Everyone else, maintain positions for another 20 minutes. This could be a feint. But it wasn't. 30 minutes later, Thomas reported the riders had disappeared into the southern darkness, heading away from the estate at speed. They were gone. The household slowly relaxed, tension bleeding out in shaky laughs and nervous conversation. Mrs. Haver emerged from the cellar with the younger staff, relief plain on her face. Annie still gripped her kitchen knife like she was ready to fight the world. Corvin waited until everyone had dispersed to their quarters before finally setting down his rifle and turning to Elira. That was, he started. Terrifying? I was going to say dangerously brave, but yes, also terrifying. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion showing through the cracks in his armor. What you said to them. About choosing me. About belonging to yourself. That was the truth. She set down her pistol carefully, hands still shaking. I meant it. Every word. Even the part about putting bullets through people? Especially that part. He almost smiled. Almost. They stood in the empty main hall, lamplight casting long shadows, the ghost of violence hanging in the air between them. They'll make trouble, Corvin said quietly. At the Territorial Council, they'll try to claim I acted outside the law, that I threatened them without cause. Let them try. We have the truth. The truth doesn't always win. No, but we will. She stepped closer to him. Because we're not afraid of them anymore, and because we're doing this together. Together, he repeated like he was testing the weight of the word. Is that so hard to believe? Yes. but his voice was softer now. I've been alone for so long, I forgot what together even meant. Then let me remind you. She reached for his hand, the one that had held weapons and built walls and carried the weight of an entire estate. We stand together. We fight together. We face whatever comes next together. No more running, no more hiding behind duty or reputation or fear. His hand closed around hers, warm and rough and solid. No more running, he agreed quietly. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who'd married as strangers and survived as something more, while the night settled around them like a promise. The next morning brought rain, soft and steady, washing away the mud and tension from the night before. Elira woke late, exhausted but somehow more rested than she'd been in weeks. Annie brought breakfast and news. "His Grace is in the library, my lady. He asked if you'd join him when you're ready." Elira dressed quickly and headed downstairs. The library was gray with rainy light, thousands of books surrounding them like witnesses. Corvin sat at one of the reading tables, maps and papers spread in front of him, but he looked up when she entered. "How are you?" he asked. "Alive." "You?" "Same." He gestured to a chair across from him. "I've been drafting a report for the Territorial Council, documenting last night's events. I'll need your statement as well." She sat, looking at the careful documentation he'd already prepared. Times, names, exact words spoken. He was thorough. "They're really going to make trouble?" she asked. "They'll try, but they overplayed their hand last night. Coming here armed, making threats against a duke's wife. That's grounds for serious charges. They'll want to settle quietly rather than let it become public. So we won. We survived. That's close enough to winning." He set down his pen. "But there will be consequences. Social ones. The other lords will choose sides. Some will support us, some won't. It could get complicated." "More complicated than armed men at the gates?" "Different complicated. Politics instead of violence. Though sometimes there's not much difference." He leaned back, studying her. "Are you ready for that? For becoming part of the frontier power structure?" "I'm already part of it. I married you." "For 6 months, temporary, remember?" The reminder stung more than it should have. "Right," she said. "Temporary." Silence fell between them, awkward and heavy with things unsaid. "Elira," Corvin started. The library door opened. Garrett entered, looking harried. "Your Grace, I apologize for interrupting, but we have visitors." "More riders?" Corvin's hand went automatically to his belt, where a pistol now hung. "No, Your Grace. Lord Wickham and 3 members of the Territorial Council. They're requesting an audience. Immediately." Elira and Corvin exchanged glances. "Send them to the formal sitting room," Corvin said. "We'll be there in 5 minutes." Garrett left. Corvin stood, offering Elira his hand. "Together?" he asked. "Together." The formal sitting room was a space Elira had never seen before. All dark wood and severe furniture, designed to intimidate. Lord Wickham stood near the fireplace with 3 other men, all wearing the formal insignia of the Territorial Council. Wickham looked uncomfortable. The others looked curious. "Duke Hale, Lady Hale." The eldest of the council members stepped forward, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a sharper voice. "I'm Council Chairman Morse. Thank you for seeing us on short notice." "What's this about?" Corvin kept his voice neutral, but Elira could feel the tension in him. "We've received some troubling reports. Claims that you threatened legitimate businessmen, made violent promises, acted outside the bounds of law." Morse's eyes flicked to Elira. "All related to your recent marriage." "Let me guess," Corvin said coldly. "The legitimate businessmen in question rode to my estate armed and demanded access to my wife?" "They claim they came to negotiate." "They came to take!" Elira stepped forward before she could think better of it. "I was there, Chairman Morse. I heard every word. They weren't negotiating. They were threatening. And my husband defended his home and his wife as any lord has the right to do." Morse studied her. "You're quite outspoken for someone so newly arrived in frontier society." "I'm honest. There's a difference." One of the other council members, younger, with a fox-like face, smiled slightly. "She's got spirit, Hale. I'll give you that." "She's got more than spirit," Wickham said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. He cleared his throat. "I came here to observe this meeting, to see if the reports about Duke Hale's new wife were accurate. They said you were young, powerless, clearly coerced into marriage." He met Elira's eyes. But yesterday, you rode out to a border dispute and negotiated a resolution I'd been fighting over for months. You did it in under 5 minutes with a neutral surveyor suggestion that somehow none of us had considered. That's not powerless. And last night, the fox-faced council member added, according to our sources, you faced down 8 armed men and told them you'd rather talk to horses because they were more honest. That's not coerced. Morse frowned. What's your point, Counselor Drake? My point is that these complaints paint a picture of a helpless girl trapped in a forced marriage with a violent duke. But that's not what I'm seeing here. Drake looked between Elira and Corvin. What I'm seeing is a partnership. Unusual, certainly, but not illegal, not even immoral. The age difference, Morse started, is no one's business but theirs, Wickham cut in. She's of legal age. She chose freely. And if I'm being honest, she's already proven more competent at frontier politics than half the lords I know. Elira blinked, surprised. This was the same man who'd almost drawn a pistol on Corvin yesterday. You're defending them? Morse looked at Wickham like he'd grown a second head. I'm stating facts. Wickham's voice was firm. Duke Hale and I have our disputes, but I'm not going to support trumped-up charges from men who came armed to his home with illegal intent. That sets a dangerous precedent. The third council member, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. He was heavy-set, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. I agree with Lord Wickham. If we allow this complaint to proceed, we're essentially saying that lords can't defend their families from armed intrusion. That's not a precedent we want to set. He looked at Corvin. Your Grace, I apologize for the inconvenience. The council will dismiss the complaint. You acted within your rights. Morse looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. Very well. The matter is closed. But, he turned to Corvin, you're stirring up trouble, Hale. Marrying a girl half your age, turning away established businessmen, causing waves in social structures that have been stable for decades. People are talking. Let them talk, Corvin said flatly. I've survived worse than gossip. Perhaps, but your wife may not have. Morse's eyes landed on Elira. Frontier society can be cruel to women who step outside expected roles. Be prepared for that. I've been preparing for cruelty my whole life, Elira said quietly. I'll manage. Something like respect flickered in Morse's expression. I believe you will. The council members took their leave. Wickham lingered, clearly wanting to say something. Your Grace, Lady Hale. He looked uncomfortable. About yesterday, the border dispute. I appreciate the suggestion. The neutral surveyor, it's a good solution. It's common sense, Elira said. Yes. Well, common sense isn't always common in these parts. He nodded to both of them. I'll be in touch to arrange the survey, and if you need support at the next council session, you have mine, for what it's worth. Then he was gone too. Elira and Corvin stood alone in the formal sitting room processing what had just happened. Did we just win? Elira asked. I think so. I'm not entirely sure. Corvin ran a hand through his hair. Wickham defending us. Drake calling it a partnership. That was unexpected. Very unexpected. They looked at each other, and suddenly both of them were laughing. Shocked, relieved, slightly hysterical laughter that had been building since the night before. We survived, Elira managed between laughs. Armed riders and territorial politics, and we actually survived. Because you told them you'd rather talk to horses, Corvin said, still laughing. That was incredible. I was terrified. You were fierce. The laughter faded into something softer, warmer. Thank you, Corvin said quietly, for standing with me, for not hiding when you had every right to. Thank you for letting me stand with you, for not sending me away. They stood in the weak morning light, rain pattering against the windows, and something fundamental shifted between them. The 6 months, Elira said carefully. The exit clause. Is that still... Do you want it to be? She thought about the keys he'd given her, the rooms that were hers, the freedom to choose. And then she thought about last night, standing together against threats, speaking as one voice, fighting side by side. I don't know, she admitted. A week ago, I couldn't wait to leave. Now? Now I think I might want to stay. Not because I have to, not because I'm trapped, but because I choose it. She met his eyes. Because you're choosing it too. Actually choosing, not just going through motions. Corvin stepped closer, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. I am choosing it, he said. All of it. You. This. Whatever we're building here. He paused. I'm still terrified. Still convinced I'm going to mess this up somehow. But I'm choosing to try anyway. That's all anyone can do. Is it enough? She smiled. It's a start. He smiled back. A real smile, full and genuine, transforming his whole face into something younger, lighter. Then let's start, he said. And in that moment, in a fortress built on isolation and fear, two people who'd married as strangers chose each other freely. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth. But it was real. And it was theirs. Outside, the rain continued falling, washing the moors clean. Inside, something new was growing, fragile still, uncertain, but stubbornly alive. They had started this as a transaction, a bargain made in desperation. They were ending it as something else entirely. The question was, what came next? The days that followed were different. Not easier. Elira wouldn't have called any of it easy, but different in ways that mattered. Corvin showed up to dinner every night. Not because he had to, but because he'd chosen to. They talked, really talked. Not the careful negotiations of strangers, but the messy, honest conversations of people trying to figure each other out. He told her about the estate, the tenants, the endless complications of managing land that half the territory wanted and the other half feared. She told him about her childhood, her father's slow decline, the desperate months after his death when every door had closed in her face. They argued about books, about politics, about whether the cook's bread was better than Mrs. Haver's assessment suggested. It was. Elira started writing lessons with Thomas. She fell off Meadow twice and swore so colorfully that Thomas laughed until he cried. But she got back on, and slowly, awkwardly, she learned. Corvin taught her the estate accounts, showing her how everything functioned. The income from tenants, the expenses of upkeep, the careful balance required to keep it all running. She had a head for numbers, it turned out. She caught errors Garrett had missed, suggested efficiencies Corvin hadn't considered. You're good at this, he said one afternoon, watching her work through a ledger. I had to manage my father's household the last year of his life. You learn fast when the alternative is starvation. We could use that skill here, if you're interested. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a role. A real one, not just decoration. She looked at him, searching for the trap, found only sincerity. I'm interested, she said. Word spread through the frontier territories. The Iron Duke's young wife wasn't what anyone expected. She rode the moors, attended border negotiations, spoke her mind at council meetings. When Corvin brought her along, she wore practical dresses instead of fashionable ones and could calculate land yields faster than most stewards. People talked. Of course they talked. Some of it was vicious. Whispers about gold digging, about youth wasted on age, about impropriety and scandal. Elira heard the rumors and learned to let them slide off like rain on stone. Some of it was different. Curiosity, respect even. Women in the nearby villages started asking for her advice on disputes with landlords. Tenants brought their problems to her when Corvin was unavailable, trusting her judgment. She was becoming something she'd never expected, a power in her own right. 3 weeks after the night of the armed riders, Elira stood in the estate office reviewing supply contracts when Corvin entered. There's someone here to see you, he said. Who? Your aunt. Elira's stomach dropped. Marta? She's in the sitting room. I can send her away if you want. She thought about it. The last time she'd seen Marta was at the wedding, her aunt's relieved face as Elira was handed off to a stranger. The years before that, growing up in her shadow, being raised by someone who'd loved her but never quite known what to do with her. No, Elira said. I'll see her. Marta stood by the window when Elira entered, looking older than she remembered, thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Aunt Marta. Elira. Marta turned, her eyes sweeping over Elira's practical dress, her pinned-up hair, the confidence in her posture. You look different. I am different. I heard stories about border disputes and council meetings, about you facing down armed men. Marta's voice was uncertain. I had to see for myself if they were true. They're true. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," Marta said finally. "For all of it. For the wedding, for pushing you into this, for treating you like a problem to solve instead of a person to protect." Elira hadn't expected that. "You did what you thought you had to. I did what was easiest for me. There's a difference." Marta's hands twisted together. "I told myself I was saving you, but really, I was just getting rid of a burden I didn't know how to carry. And now I see you don't need saving at all. You never did." Marta smiled, sad and genuine. "You needed someone to believe in you, and I failed at that." The anger Elira had been carrying for months cracked, letting something softer through. "You kept me alive," she said quietly. "After Father died. You could have abandoned me completely. You didn't. That's a low bar. Maybe, but it's something." Elira moved to the window, standing beside her aunt. "I'm not going to lie and say everything's perfect. This marriage, this life, it's complicated. But I chose it, eventually, and I'm choosing to stay." "He treats you well?" "He treats me like an equal. It's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure." Marta looked at her niece, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. "You've grown up," she said. "When I wasn't paying attention, you grew into someone formidable." "I had to. The world doesn't leave much choice." "No, I suppose it doesn't." Marta reached out hesitantly, then pulled Elira into a hug. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. I'm saying it now." Elira hugged her back, feeling years of resentment and fear slowly loosening their grip. They talked for another hour, carefully, honestly, building something that looked almost like forgiveness. When Marta left, Elira felt lighter than she had in months. Corvin found her later in the library, staring out at the darkening moors. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than expected. Worse than I hoped." She turned to face him. She apologized. Actually, apologized. "That's good, isn't it?" "It's complicated." She sighed. "Everything's complicated. Welcome to being human." He sat down beside her. "For what it's worth, I'm glad she came. You needed closure." "Did I get it?" "Did you?" Elira thought about it. "Maybe. Partially. Enough for now." Enough is enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching night fall over the estate they were learning to share. "The 6 months are almost up," Corvin said quietly. Elira's heart stuttered. She'd been counting too, though she'd tried not to. 4 more weeks, she confirmed. "Do you know what you want? When they're up?" She looked at him, this man who'd bought her freedom, given her keys, taught her to fight for herself. This man who was still learning how to be around people but tried anyway because she'd asked him to. "I want to stay," she said. "Not as a temporary arrangement, not as part of a bargain. I want to stay because this is home. Because you're my partner, my friend, my—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Your husband?" he offered quietly. "My husband," she agreed. "Actually, really, not just legally." The hope in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "You're sure?" he asked. "Are you?" "I've never been more sure of anything." His hand found hers. "You turned my fortress into a home. You challenged me to be better. You stood beside me when things got dangerous and you never flinched. How could I not want you to stay?" "Pretty words, Duke Hale." "True words, Duchess Hale." She smiled at that. The title that had felt like a cage now felt like a choice. "Then I'm staying," she said firmly. "No exit clause?" "No exit clause." He pulled her into his arms, careful still, like he was afraid she'd break, but warm and solid and real. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For choosing this. For choosing me. For being brave enough to demand better and patient enough to wait while I figured out how to give it." She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you for letting me choose," she said, "for making it a real choice instead of an illusion." They stayed like that as darkness fell completely, two people who'd started as a transaction and become something neither had expected. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly under stars. Inside, a fortress built on fear was slowly transforming into something that looked almost like happiness. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was theirs. And that, Elira thought, was more than enough. Except the frontier had other ideas. 2 days later, a formal summons arrived. Heavy paper, official seals, the kind of document that meant trouble no matter how politely it was worded. Corvin read it twice, his expression darkening with each pass. "What is it?" Elira asked. "The Territorial Council. They're calling a formal assembly, 3 weeks from now." He set the letter down like it might bite him. "They want to address concerns regarding recent unconventional marriages and their impact on frontier social structures." They're coming after us. Not just us, but yes, we're the primary target. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Morse and his faction. They didn't like losing the complaint. This is their countermove. What kind of assembly? Public. All the lords, major landowners, prominent merchants. Basically, everyone who matters in the territories gets a vote on whether marriages like ours should be, regulated. Elira's stomach went cold. Regulated how? Age restrictions, waiting periods, required council approval for unions deemed socially disruptive. His voice was bitter. They can't undo what's already done, but they can make sure it doesn't happen again, and they can make our lives difficult in the process by questioning the validity of our marriage, by questioning everything about it, my motives, your consent, whether I took advantage of your situation. He met her eyes. They'll try to paint this as predatory, make me out to be a monster and you a victim. I'm not a victim. I know that, you know that. But will they believe it when you're standing in front of 40 hostile lords who've already decided what they think? The challenge in his voice was clear. This wasn't going to be easy. Then we make them believe it, Elira said. How? By showing them the truth. By standing together in front of everyone and proving that this marriage, this partnership, is real and valid and none of their business. She stepped closer to him. You said I'd face social cruelty, that frontier society punishes women who step outside expected roles. Well, here it is. And I'm not backing down. Something fierce lit in his eyes. You're sure? Because once we do this, once we fight back publicly, there's no taking it back. We'll have enemies. We already have enemies. At least this way we'll have allies too. He studied her face, searching for doubt, found only determination. All right, he said. We fight. Together. Together. The next 3 weeks were a storm of preparation. Corvin worked with Garrett to compile documentation. Every transaction, every agreement, every witness statement from their marriage. Elira practiced her testimony with Mrs. Haver playing skeptical council member, refining her arguments until they were sharp as knives. They rode out to visit tenants, securing support. Most were loyal to Corvin already, but Elira made sure they knew her too. Not as the Duke's property, but as someone who listened to their concerns and actually helped solve problems. Word of the assembly spread. Opinions divided sharply. Some lords supported the proposed regulations, seeing them as necessary safeguards. Others opposed them as government overreach. The frontier buzzed with debate. 3 days before the assembly, Lord Wickham sent a message. You'll have my vote, and my voice, if you need it. What you're building is unusual, but it's not wrong. Don't let them convince you otherwise. It was something. 2 days before, Counselor Drake sent his own note. I've been married 3 times. Trust me when I say age and circumstance matter far less than actual partnership. Prove you have that, and you'll win. The night before the assembly, Elira couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the moors under moonlight, her mind racing through every possible argument and counter-argument. A knock at her door. Come in, she called. Corvin entered, also clearly unable to sleep. He'd been working in his study, still wore his day clothes, looked exhausted and wired in equal measure. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow? He asked. Every possible way it could go wrong, yes. He moved to stand beside her at the window. We could not go. Refuse to participate. Tell them to make their regulations and let us live our lives in peace. Would that work? No. They'd take our absence as admission of guilt, make their ruling without our input, and enforce it anyway. He sighed. But it was worth considering. They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching. I'm scared, Elira admitted quietly. Not of them, but of failing, of letting you down. You couldn't possibly let me down. You've already exceeded every expectation I had. That's because your expectations were incredibly low. He smiled despite the tension. Fair point. What if they don't believe us? She asked. What if we say everything right and they still rule against us? Then we've lost the political battle but won the actual war. Because regardless of what they decide, you and I know the truth. We chose this. We built this. And no council ruling can take that away unless we let it. She turned to face him properly. You've gotten better at the inspirational speeches. I've had a good teacher. His hand found hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. This, us, it's the best decision I've ever made. Even if it costs me politically, even if it makes my life harder, you were worth it. Her throat tightened. You're going to make me cry before the assembly. That's terrible strategy. Cry now, fight tomorrow. Is that frontier wisdom? That's Corvin wisdom, much less reliable. She laughed despite her fear. And then she was in his arms, holding tight to the one solid thing in a world that felt like it was shifting under her feet. We're going to win, she said into his chest. How do you know? Because we have to. Because the alternative is unacceptable. That's not logic. No, it's faith. He held her tighter. Then I'll have faith too. They stayed like that until the moon set and dawn began creeping over the moors, two people drawing strength from each other before walking into battle. The assembly was held in the Territorial Council Hall, a massive stone building in the capital settlement, 3 hours' ride from Hale Estate. Elira and Corvin arrived early, wanting to control the ground. The hall was already filling, lords in formal dress, their wives watching from a separate gallery, merchants and landowners taking seats in the back rows. Easily 200 people, maybe more. The air hummed with anticipation and judgment. Chairman Morse presided from a raised platform, flanked by the other council members. His expression was neutral, but Elira caught the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd already won. Duke Hale, Lady Hale. Morse's voice carried through the hall. Please take your position at the respondents' table. They sat at a table facing the council, backs to the crowd. Elira could feel eyes burning into her, curious, hostile, pitying. She kept her spine straight and her expression calm. Morse cleared his throat. This assembly has been called to address concerns regarding recent marriages in the frontier territories. Specifically, unions characterized by significant age disparity, financial imbalance, and questionable consent. The council proposes new regulations to prevent exploitation and protect vulnerable individuals. Vulnerable individuals like me, Elira's voice cut through before she could stop herself. Morse blinked. Lady Hale, you'll have an opportunity to speak. I'm speaking now. She stood up, ignoring Corvin's warning hand on her arm. You're talking about me like I'm not here, like I'm some helpless child who needs protection from my own choices. I'm 19 years old, legally an adult, and fully capable of deciding who I marry. Or do the frontier territories not recognize women's agency anymore? Silence crashed through the hall. Morse recovered first. Lady Hale, no one is questioning your legal status. We're questioning the circumstances that led to your marriage. You were in debt, desperate, with limited options. That hardly constitutes free choice. You're right. I was desperate. My father died and left me with nothing but debts I couldn't pay. Men circled like vultures, making offers that had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with ownership. She looked around the hall, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Some of those men are in this room right now. Shall I name them? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several men shifted uncomfortably. That's not relevant, Morse started. It's completely relevant. You want to regulate marriages to protect vulnerable people? Start by regulating the predators who create the desperation in the first place. Her voice sharpened. My husband paid my father's debts before the wedding. He gave me the option to walk away. He provided me with my own rooms, my own keys, and an exit clause after 6 months. Does that sound like exploitation to you? It sounds like a man with enough money to purchase compliance, Morse shot back. Then you don't know him very well. Corvin stood. May I speak, Chairman? This isn't a trial, Your Grace. This is a policy discussion. Then let's discuss policy honestly. You're not here to protect anyone. You're here because my marriage threatens the social order you're comfortable with. Because a young woman with agency and a voice is scarier than a dozen quiet, miserable wives locked in acceptable marriages. That's a serious accusation, one of the other council members said. It's an accurate observation. Corvin's voice was steady, controlled. How many men in this hall are married to women they don't love? How many wives are trapped in unions they can't escape because divorce means financial ruin and social death? But those marriages are acceptable because they follow the proper forms. Age appropriate, council approved, utterly hollow. Your Grace, I'm not finished. My wife and I have built a partnership based on honesty and mutual respect. We work together managing the estate. She attends council meetings and border negotiations. She has proven herself more competent than half the administrators in this room. And you want to regulate that because it makes you uncomfortable? Morse's face was red. The council has a duty to maintain social stability. Social stability at the cost of individual freedom is just tyranny with better marketing. The hall erupted. Some people shouted agreement, others outrage. Morse banged his gavel, demanding order. Elira caught movement in the crowd, Lord Wickham standing. I'd like to speak, Wickham called out. Morse looked like he wanted to refuse, but too many eyes were on him. Recognized. Wickham moved to the center aisle. 3 weeks ago, I had a border dispute with Duke Hale that had been ongoing for months. We were minutes away from violence. Then Lady Hale rode up and suggested a neutral surveyor. Simple solution, obvious in retrospect. None of us had thought of it because we were too busy posturing. He looked at Elira directly. That's not the action of a woman who's been coerced or controlled. That's the action of someone thinking clearly and solving problems. And if this council wants to regulate her marriage because she's young and he's older, then we're admitting we value appearances over actual results. Councillor Drake stood next. I've observed Duke and Lady Hale at 2 council sessions. They communicate like equals. They disagree in public, which is refreshing, honestly. They make decisions together. That's more partnership than I've seen in most of the proper marriages in this room. Another voice from the crowd. A woman from the gallery, older, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to being heard. I'm Lady Remington. I've been married for 30 years to a man my father chose when I was 17. He was 40. No one questioned it because his money and my family connections made it acceptable. But he's a drunk and a fool, and I've spent 3 decades managing his estate while he takes credit. She looked at Morse. You want to regulate marriages? Start with the ones that are actually broken. Leave the people who found something real alone. More voices. Supporting, opposing, arguing. The assembly had become a battleground. Morse banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! We will have order! The noise died down slowly. This isn't about individual cases, Morse said, visibly frustrated. This is about establishing guidelines. It's about control, Elira cut in. About powerful men deciding what's acceptable for everyone else. Well, here's what I find unacceptable. Being told my choices don't matter. Being treated like property in a transaction. Being regulated because I threaten your comfortable assumptions about how women should behave. You're very passionate, Lady Hale, but passion doesn't equal wisdom. No, but results do. She pulled out papers from the folder they'd brought. In the 3 months since my marriage, Hale Estate has increased tenant satisfaction by 40%. We've resolved 2 long-standing border disputes. We've improved crop yields through better resource allocation, and we've done it together, as partners. That's not exploitation, that's effectiveness. She walked forward, placing the documents in front of Morse. Everything's documented. Tenant statements, yield reports, financial records. Judge us on results, not assumptions. Morse leafed through the papers, his expression growing more pinched with each page. This is impressive, he admitted reluctantly, but it doesn't address the fundamental concern. Age disparity creates inherent power imbalance. So does wealth, and social status, and education, and a dozen other factors. Corvin moved to stand beside Elira. If you're going to regulate every marriage with any power imbalance, you'll regulate most of them out of existence. The question isn't whether imbalance exists, it's whether both parties choose to work with it honestly. And you claim you do? We know we do, Elira said firmly. I have my own keys. My own income now. Duke Hale pays me for estate management work. My own voice in every decision that affects our lives. Can every woman in this hall say the same? Silence answered her. Morse set down the papers. The council will deliberate and vote. Duke Hale, Lady Hale, please wait outside while we discuss. They left the hall, emerging into weak sunshine. Elira's hands were shaking with adrenaline. Corvin pulled her aside, away from the other people waiting. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "I might have gone too far." "You went exactly far enough. You made them see you, not as a victim or a trophy, but as a person with agency. That's what we needed." "Will it be enough?" "I don't know, but it was true, and that matters." They waited. An hour passed. 2. Other people emerged from the hall for breaks, some nodding to them respectfully, others avoiding eye contact. Finally, Garrett appeared at the door. "They're ready." They walked back in together. The hall had quieted, tension thick enough to cut. Morse stood at his podium, papers in front of him. "The council has deliberated. We've heard testimony, reviewed documentation, and discussed the proposed regulations extensively." Elira held her breath. The motion to implement new marriage regulations fails. 7 votes against, 5 in favor. Relief crashed through her like a wave. Corvin's hand found hers, gripping tight. "However," Morse continued, voice sharp, "this assembly wishes to make clear that while we respect individual choice, we will be watching. Marriages entered under questionable circumstances will face scrutiny. Those who abuse power will be held accountable." "Understood," Corvin said evenly. "We welcome scrutiny. We have nothing to hide." Morse nodded stiffly. "This assembly is concluded." The hall erupted again, but different this time. People arguing, congratulating, debating. Elira heard her name spoken a dozen times, in tones ranging from admiration to disgust. They pushed through the crowd to the exit. Outside, several people waited. Lord Wickham, Councillor Drake, Lady Remington, others who'd spoken in their favor. "Well done," Wickham said. "Both of you. That took courage." "It took honesty," Elira corrected. "We just told the truth." "The truth is often the most courageous thing," Lady Remington said with a sad smile. "Most of us spend our lives avoiding it. You chose differently. That matters." They talked for a few more minutes, making tentative alliances, building connections. Then Corvin and Elira excused themselves and headed for their horses. The ride back to the estate was quiet, both of them processing what had just happened. "We won," Elira said finally, as the familiar moors came into view. "We survived," Corvin corrected. "That's close enough." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." He looked at her, something soft in his expression. "But this time feels different. Like we didn't just survive. Like we actually changed something." "Did we?" Lady Remington stood up and talked about her broken marriage in front of 200 people. Wickham defended us publicly. Drake called us partners in front of the council. He paused. "Yeah, I think we changed something." The estate appeared on the horizon, no longer looking like a prison, just home. "What happens now?" Elira asked. "Now we live. We keep building what we started. We prove every day that we made the right choice." He smiled. "And we deal with whatever comes next. Together." "Together," she agreed. They rode through the gates as the sun set, painting the moors gold and amber. Mrs. Haver met them at the entrance, relief plain on her face. "Well?" she asked. "We won," Elira said. "Of course you did." Mrs. Haver smiled properly, a rare and genuine thing. "Dinner's waiting, and there's fresh bread." "Told you the bread was good," Corvin murmured. Elira laughed, and it felt like releasing something she'd been holding for months. That night, they ate in the dining hall, not at opposite ends like strangers, but side by side. They talked about the assembly, about the looks on various lords' faces, about Lady Remington's courage. "She'll face consequences for that," Elira said quietly. "Speaking out like she did." "Probably, but maybe her speaking out gives someone else permission to do the same. Change happens slowly, then all at once." Corvin refilled her wine glass. "We're not going to fix the frontier's problems overnight, but we started something today." "A revolution?" "An uncomfortable conversation, which is how most revolutions start." They finished dinner and walked through the estate together, through corridors that Elira now knew by heart, past rooms that had gone from strange to familiar, upstairs that no longer felt like climbing into a cage. At her door, they stopped. "Question 3, Elira said suddenly. Corvin blinked. "What?" "You owe me 3 questions. I used 2. I've been saving the 3rd." "Now?" After everything today, you want to use it now? Yes? He smiled, tired but genuine. All right, ask. Do you love me? The question hung between them, vulnerable and enormous. Corvin's expression shifted through surprise, fear, and then something that looked almost like relief. Yes, he said quietly. I didn't plan to. I didn't expect to. But somewhere between the wedding and the storm and the armed riders and today, I fell completely in love with you. And it terrifies me. But it's true. Elira's heart felt too big for her chest. Good. Good? Because I love you too, and I was worried it was one-sided and that would make things really awkward. He laughed. A real, full laugh that transformed his whole face. You're ridiculous. You're not exactly smooth yourself. It terrifies me, but it's true, is possibly the least romantic declaration ever. I'm new at this. I know. She stepped closer, looking up at him. We're both new at this, but we're learning together. Together, he repeated, and then he kissed her. It was careful at first, both of them uncertain, both still learning how to be close to another person without walls and fear in the way. But it deepened, became something real and warm, and entirely theirs. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Elira smiled. That was better than the smooth declaration, she said. I should hope so. Want to come in? She gestured to her rooms, the space that had been hers alone for months. Are you sure? I'm sure. He followed her inside, and for the first time since their wedding, there were no keys between them. No barriers. Just two people choosing each other freely. The months that followed weren't perfect. Change never was. Some lords refused to accept them, spreading rumors and making trouble where they could. The territorial council watched them closely, looking for any sign of the exploitation they'd claimed to prevent. But something had shifted in the frontier territories. Women started asking harder questions about their own marriages. Young people fought harder for their own choices. The conversation Corvin and Elira had started continued without them, taking on its own momentum. Hale Estate flourished. Elira's management skills combined with Corvin's experience created something neither could have achieved alone. Tenant satisfaction continued rising. Crop yields improved. Border disputes got resolved through negotiation instead of violence. And slowly, grudgingly, the frontier began to respect them. Not because they were perfect, not because they'd solved every problem or made everyone happy, but because they'd stood up for something real and refused to back down. A year after the assembly, Elira stood at her window, the same window she'd stared out of that first night, feeling trapped and afraid. The view hadn't changed. The moors still stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful. But everything else had. Corvin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked. How far we've come. From that first dinner you ran away from to this. I apologized for that. Multiple times. I'm still going to hold it over you occasionally. That's fair. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they'd learned to share. Mrs. Haver told me something interesting today, Elira said. What? 3 of the staff have gotten engaged. To people they chose themselves, not matches their families arranged. She thinks we inspired them. That's terrifying. That's wonderful. She turned in his arms to face him. We're changing things, Corvin. Not through force or regulations, just by being honest about what we are. And what are we? Partners. Equals. People who chose each other and keep choosing each other every day. She smiled. A revolution disguised as a marriage. I like that description. You should. I'm very clever. Insufferably so. She kissed him, and it still felt new even after a year. Still felt like a choice freely made instead of an obligation fulfilled. Outside, the moors darkened into night. Inside, warmth spread through rooms that had once been empty. 2 years later, Elira held their daughter, tiny, furious, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Corvin stood beside her, looking terrified and awed in equal measure. She's perfect, he said quietly. She's screaming. Perfectly screaming. Mrs. Haver bustled around the room, organizing things with her usual efficiency. Annie, promoted to senior staff now, helped with practiced competence. "What are you going to name her?" Annie asked. Elira looked at Corvin. They'd discussed this. "Elaine," she said quietly, "after her aunt." Corvin's expression cracked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. She deserves to be remembered, and our daughter deserves to carry a name that means something." He nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he carefully took the baby, holding her like she was made of glass. "Hello, Elaine," he whispered. "Welcome to the chaos." The baby stopped screaming, apparently satisfied with this greeting. Elira watched her husband with their daughter and felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd fought for. Not just her own freedom, but the freedom to build something real. Something that would last beyond her and Corvin into a future where their daughter would have choices they'd never had. 5 years after the assembly, Chairman Morse died. His replacement was Councillor Drake, who immediately started pushing through reforms. Age disparity regulations were formally abolished. Women were given legal standing to contest arranged marriages. Financial transparency in marriage contracts became mandatory. The frontier was changing, slowly, messily, with plenty of resistance, but changing nonetheless. And at the center of it, whether they'd intended it or not, were Corvin and Elira Hale, the Iron Duke who'd learned to be soft, the desperate girl who'd become a force. Together, they'd rewritten the rules of their world. 10 years after that fog-choked morning, when Elira had walked down an aisle to marry a stranger, she stood in the same territorial council hall where they'd fought for their marriage. But this time, she wasn't a respondent. She was a counselor. The appointment had been unanimous. Even Morse's old allies had voted for her. She'd earned it through a decade of competent estate management, successful negotiations, and unflinching honesty. Corvin sat in the gallery, watching with barely concealed pride. Beside him, 9-year-old Elaine fidgeted, bored by politics but determined to support her mother. "Councillor Hale has the floor," the new chairman announced. Elira stood looking out at faces both familiar and new. Some had opposed her for years, some had supported her from the start. All of them were listening. "I'm proposing an expansion of tenant rights," she said. "Specifically, guaranteed housing security and appeals processes for unfair evictions. I've drafted the full proposal. It's being distributed now." Murmurs of discussion. Some supportive, some skeptical. "This is quite radical, Councillor Hale," one of the older lords said. "It's fair," she corrected. "Radical would be questioning why we've let people lose their homes over minor disputes for so long. It could set a dangerous precedent. It sets a necessary one. We're not asking lords to give up legitimate authority. We're asking them to use it responsibly. If that's dangerous, we have bigger problems." The debate continued. Elira fielded questions, made her case, stood her ground. She'd learned from the best, from Corvin's patient negotiation, from the mistakes others had made, from her own hard-won experience. When the vote came, her proposal passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Progress. After the session, she met Corvin and Elaine outside. "You did it," Corvin said. "We did it. This wouldn't exist without everything we built." She picked up Elaine, who was getting too big to be carried, but still allowed it occasionally. "Without proving that change is possible." "I'm hungry," Elaine announced. "Politics is boring." "You won't think so when you're older," Elira told her. "Will I be a counselor too?" "You can be anything you choose. That's the whole point." They walked through the settlement together, a family built from desperation and choice in equal measure. People nodded to them respectfully. Some with genuine warmth, others with grudging acceptance. The Hales were part of the frontier's fabric now, whether everyone liked it or not. That night, back at the estate, after Elaine had been put to bed and the household had settled for sleep, Elira and Corvin stood in their library, the same library where they'd planned their defense, argued about books, slowly learned to be partners. "Remember when you gave me keys?" Elira asked. "Our second day here, you looked terrified." "I was terrified. I thought they were keys to a prettier cage." "What are they now?" She pulled the keys from her pocket. She still carried them, though she rarely needed them anymore. "Now they're a reminder that freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim and defend and choose every single day." Heavy symbolism for a piece of metal? "You started it, giving me keys instead of expectations." He smiled. "Best decision I ever made. Second best. What's first? Deciding to love me back. That took courage." Still does sometimes. You're terrifying when you're right, which is always. I'm not agreeing to that. You don't have to. We both know it's true. They stood in the warm lamplight, years of shared history around them, the books they'd read together, the maps where they'd planned improvements, the comfortable chairs where they'd sat and talked through problems until solutions emerged. Do you ever regret it? Corvin asked quietly. The whole thing, starting with a transaction instead of a love story. No. Elira's answer was immediate and certain. Because we earned this. We chose each other when we didn't have to. We fought for it when we could have walked away. That's worth more than any storybook romance. Even when it's hard? Especially then. He pulled her close and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly after years of practice. Thank you, he said. For what? For seeing past the monster everyone said I was. For being brave enough to demand better. For staying when you could have left. He paused. For making this fortress feel like home. Thank you for giving me the keys, for meaning it, for being willing to change and grow and learn with me. She looked up at him. For loving me enough to be scared. Still am, every day. Good, me too. They kissed, and it was familiar now, but no less powerful for that familiarity. Still a choice. Still a promise. Outside, the moors stretched under starlight, the same harsh landscape that had greeted Elira that first terrifying day. But she wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She was Counselor Elira Hale. Wife, mother, administrator, voice for the voiceless. A woman who'd been sold to settle debts and had transformed that transaction into a revolution. And standing beside her was Corvin, the Iron Duke who'd learned that strength wasn't about walls and isolation. It was about letting someone in and choosing them every single day, even when it was terrifying. Together, they'd taken a bargain made in fog and desperation and turned it into something neither had imagined possible. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true, and entirely theirs. The key that had once symbolized escape now represented something better, the freedom to stay, to choose, to build a life worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the greatest power of all. Not survival, not sovereignty over others, but sovereignty over your own story. The power to write your own ending, no matter how it began. They'd started with nothing but fear and necessity. They'd built trust, partnership, love, change, and watching from her window years later, holding her husband's hand while their daughter slept and the frontier slowly transformed around them, Elira understood the truth. It wasn't the marriage that had changed her fate. It was the moment she'd chosen it, and every moment since when she'd chosen it again. That was power. That was freedom. That was home.